There are moments when time is stretched taut like a bowstring, poised to release. These are such moments, the hours between dark and dawn, between night and day. Before the animals stir, before the first voice is heard, there is only breath, the breath of sleep, the breath of cold, the breath of another day beginning in silence. It's easy to take these moments for granted. Easy to assume this has always been the way that our lives have always begun, with the insistent blare of alarm clocks, with the clamor of city streets and factory whistles, with the jangle of tractor bells and the drone of machinery. But it wasn't. Our ancestors woke to different sounds, their own and those of the beasts they shared their world with. In the heart of a medieval village, 600 years ago, waking was not abrupt. It was not marked by clocks or alarms. It began with the absence of warmth and the return of hunger. So let us step back from the clamor and the rush. Let us empty our lungs and listen to the quiet truth of how our ancestors once began their days. If you've ever slept in a drafty old house, you know how sudden cold can be in the middle of the night. Sometimes it takes you by surprise, a gust of wind slithering through a crack in the window pane, chilling you to the bone, despite a mound of blankets. Such surprises were not uncommon 6 centuries ago. Houses were older then and less well maintained. Drafty was an occupational hazard. So around 4 a.m., the villagers would wake, pulling up the bedding to shield against the creeping cold. Sleep would wrinkle their brows, pull their mouths into uneasy smiles, but their eyes would gleam with alertness. For one thing had changed while they slept. The pigs had moved from their corner. They had rooted around in the night and now lay curled up somewhere else, grunting softly. The chickens had scratched around the room, pecking at stray grains until their bellies were full. The goat would nudge the door with its nose, bleating impatiently for breakfast. These were not visitors. They were warmth and food. They were family. The humans stirred too, stretching stiff limbs, shaking off the fog of sleep, each movement echoing the rustle of creatures stirring in the hayloft above. It was a communal awakening, an unspoken choreography, each villager rising in their turn, each animal finding its place in the morning routine. Lighting the hearth was the first order of business. So the eldest would rise first, shuffling to the hearth, pushing aside the ashes with a poker, dropping in a small amount of fuel, striking a flint and steel. A tiny spark, a curl of smoke, a prayer whispered over the dying embers. If you're lucky, if not, there is no fire today. This was not a game. Fire was life. It chased away the cold. It cooked their food, kept predators at bay, cast dancing shadows on the walls, and made the darkness of evening more bearable. Without it, there was only cold. But fire demanded constant care. Old fires had to be coaxed back to life, new ones built from scratch, and the gathering of fuel was never a certainty. In winter, wood was scarce, so precious that homes were built close together, sharing walls to conserve heat. Each family gathered what little they could, storing it in a dry place, making sure that a mouse did not dash across the floor with a burning ember tucked under its tail. But even the best laid plans could fail. Storms could sweep through and snatch away branches, stripping them bare. Fires could die, leaving nothing but smoldering ash and the smell of smoke in their wake. If the fire caught, a surge of warmth chased out the chill. Light flickered and grew, chasing back the darkness of night. But for the moment, the shadows lingered longest in the corners, hiding the scraps of last night's supper, a crusty piece of bread, a smear of porridge on a wooden bowl, the bones of a gnawed chicken leg. In the old days, the bread that waited overnight did not rise. It was not a gift of airy lightness. It was wrapped in a linen cloth, a dense brick of dough, hard, dense and cold. To get to the warmth within, you had to break it, first with your hands, tearing it into pieces, then with your teeth. It was coarse flour ground on a rough stone, baked in a clay oven without yeast. leavened only by the patience of the baker and the long, slow breath of the rising sun. But this austerity was not a punishment. It was a necessity. Life was hard. Food was precious. Nothing was wasted. Even the hardest crust, the most shriveled raisin, the smallest scrap of meat was saved, reworked, repurposed. And when it came to the bread, every shard, every crumb was broken off by hand, by mouth, savored and swallowed. This was not just sustenance, it was communion. Each bite a blessing, each crumb a prayer of thanks for the simple gift of being alive another day. 600 years ago, the hands that kneaded the dough were gnarled and strong. They had hewn wood and carried water. They had stroked goats and cradled chicks. The fingers were thick and sure. They knew the weight of grain and the feel of a well-turned loaf. Their owners were farmers, their hands bearing witness to the rhythms of the seasons, the toil of planting, the sweat of summer, the bounty of harvest. Now they moved with purpose, breaking the bread, tearing it into pieces big and small, tossing their heads back to catch the crumbs that fell. Some crumbled into bowls, others onto waiting plates. The youngest would sit at the far end, watching, waiting for the feast to start. Soon their turn would come, and meanwhile the hens would peck at scattered grains, clucking softly, their beaks flashing like polished bone. Somewhere a pig snorted, rooting in the mud. A goat nibbled on a stray leaf, chewing its cud. All around the old house, life was stirring. The very stones seemed to hum with the energy of awakening, of bodies coming alive after the stillness of night. Outside, the pale light of dawn pressed against the wall. The sky was not yet aflame with color. The sun had not climbed into the heavens. Day had not begun. Only hunger had awoken, so the villagers ate in silence, listening to the crisp snap of bread, to the clink of spoon against bowl, to the murmur of voices stirring in the next house, to the rumble of the wagon on the lane, to the distant call of a dog, to the whisper of leaves in the trees, to the sigh of the wind as it nudged open a shutter, to the chirp of a cricket, to the drowsy buzz of a fly. And when they were done, they rose slowly, wiping their mouths with the corner of their cloths, gathering up the remnants of their meal. The old man stoked the fire, his hands dancing lightly over the embers. The woman washed a pot, her fingers moving with practiced grace. The children set out to gather fuel, their laughter echoing in the yard. The animals shuffled to the door, blinking in the weak light, eager for their turn to graze in the fields. As the minutes ticked by, day unfurled its colors. Roosters crowed, hailers rang out, church bells clanged in the distance. The sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky with gold and rose. Work began. The plow cut into the soil, the scythe gleamed in the grass, the loom clicked rhythmically, the hammer rang out. All day long the work continued. All day long the sun climbed higher, and all day long the villagers toiled in its light, sustained by the silent truth of their morning ritual, sustained by the memory of bread broken, of fires tended, of a day begun in the quiet strength of things that never changed, of a life lived close to earth, to animals and to each other, sustained by the knowledge that even when the world shifted and seasons turned, this, the quiet truth of a shared existence, would always remain. You're just hungry. You're not starving. You've had worse days. Remember that. This too shall pass. Onions, garlic, and the illusion of flavor. No butter, no salt. Only a clove rubbed across crust. A ghost of taste. Nothing more. Silence at the morning meal. No voices. Only chewing, swallowing, breathing. The meal is not joy. It is continuation. Ale for the lucky, water for the poor. Ale is safe. Ale is warm, but not for everyone. Most drink water and pray it's clean. No sugar, no caffeine, no heat. No honey on bread, no coffee in mugs, no heat in hands, only cold and habit. Hunger as a habit, not a crisis. You are not starving. You are simply hungry, like yesterday and tomorrow. The bread is gone, the warmth has not come, but the day has begun. It is time to leave the house, to find the fields, to touch the dirt, to follow food back to its beginning. Let us go with them into the mist. There was a stone cottage where the chimney was clogged with soot and the roof sagged under the weight of wet leaves. Inside, a woman stirred something thin and watery in a dented metal pot over a sputtering fire. She wore a shawl pulled tight against the chill, and her face was lined with worry. Across from her sat a girl of maybe 10 summers, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Her name was Elspeth, and she hadn't spoken in almost 2 weeks. She didn't have to. Her mother knew what she wanted. A piece of stale bread and water, the only food they had. When the water boiled, the woman ladled it into a chipped ceramic bowl and pushed it toward her daughter. Elspeth didn't move. She kept her gaze on the fire. "Eat," her mother said softly, reaching out to touch her shoulder, but Elspeth flinched away. She didn't want her mother's touch. She didn't want anything, except maybe the courage to scream. But screaming wouldn't bring food or warmth, and so she stayed still. Silent treatment for silent treatment. Hunger for hunger. Their cat, Scruff, padded into the room and rubbed against the woman's leg, purring loudly. He knew there were mice in the walls. He knew there were birds in the eaves. He knew the world was full of tasty things. He was a fat cat. The girl saw him, though, and that made her sad, because she, too, was hungry. The woman watched her daughter's shoulders slump. She saw the gaunt hollows beneath her cheeks, the haunted look in her eyes. She looked away before her dam broke. "Eat," she whispered again, this time into the silence of their empty home. Outside, the wind moaned through the naked branches of the old oak tree, swirling fallen leaves around Elspeth's bare feet. She poked at the dirt with a twig, making patterns and designs. When the first flake of snow drifted down, she watched it land on a leaf, then melt into nothing. She wished it would snow more, cover everything in white, hide all the grey. Maybe if it snowed all winter long, she'd be happy. Or maybe she'd freeze. She didn't know. All she knew was that her stomach rumbled like the cavernous depths of winter itself. Her mother cleared her throat. "It's time." Elspeth nodded numbly, without taking her eyes off the ground. Time to get up, time to walk, time to hope that this time there would be something to eat, time to be a good little girl who didn't complain, who didn't ask questions, who didn't make a fuss. She stood up and brushed off her skirt. The village wasn't far, but it felt like walking into the mouth of a monster. Every step took her deeper into its dark belly. As they walked, her mother hummed a tuneless song, a habit she'd developed in the last few years. It was a strange thing to do when there was nothing left to celebrate. No one else in town sang anymore either. They didn't know any songs, or maybe they forgot how. The houses they passed were mostly empty. Some had been abandoned completely, while others held a single person wrapped in blankets by a dying fire. People they knew, people they didn't, all staring blankly ahead. The only sound, louder than the wind, was the crunching of snow under their boots. A thin layer covered the ground, muffling everything. The sky was grey, the clouds heavy, the trees bare and the river frozen. Even the animals had gone somewhere else. There was no smoke rising from any chimneys. There was no light in any windows. Elspeth clutched her mother's hand, feeling the bony knuckles beneath her small fingers. Her mother squeezed back, trying to give her comfort. In the distance, a dog barked, then fell silent. The wind picked up, sending icy needles into Elspeth's exposed skin. She pulled her arm away from her mother's grasp and wrapped it around herself, hugging her thin frame. But the cold seeped through her clothes and settled deep in her bones. She shivered violently and her teeth chattered. She wanted to run home, curl up beside her mother, watch the flames dance, but she didn't dare let go of her mother's hand. If she did, she might never find her way back. They reached the center of town and stopped in front of the weathered wooden door that once marked the entrance to the tavern. Now, it was just an empty shell. a monument to better times. Elspeth could still see the faint outlines of men sitting at tables, hear the echo of laughter, feel the warmth of the hearth, smell the sweetness of ale. She pressed her face against the door, trying to feel something, anything, but all she found was cold, hard wood. She stepped back and turned away, fighting tears. She didn't want to cry. Tears wouldn't bring back the laughter, so she looked down and walked on. Soon the only sounds they heard were their own footsteps and the wind whispering through the skeletal branches overhead. The trees seemed to be reaching out to grab at them, pulling them closer to the gaping maw of winter. Everything was grey, grey sky, grey trees, grey snow, grey despair. And then they saw the river. The ice had broken. Strong currents rushed over the newly made dams. The water surged forward, threatening to spill over the banks. Spring was coming. Hope flickered in Elspeth's chest. Maybe they would survive after all. Maybe the sun would shine again. Maybe they would laugh again. But she kept walking. They walked until the river disappeared from view, until the forest swallowed the path, until they were alone in a field of trampled weeds and frosted grass. And here they stopped. This was the place. The wind whipped around them, biting at their exposed skin. The temperature dropped. Quickly, Elspeth huddled closer to her mother, seeking warmth, finding none. "Go," her mother said, her voice hoarse and weak. "Find food. Bring it back." Elspeth stared at her. Was her mother asking her to forage? Without a word, she turned and ran, weaving between the withered stalks, kicking up tiny whirlwinds of dead leaves and dust. She could feel her breath in her throat, a hot, sharp flame struggling not to go out. She had to keep moving. If she stopped, she might freeze. She saw a flash of movement between the plants and crouched low, peering out at the fat, lazy rabbits hopping over the field, feasting on the dry weeds. Her finger twitched on the string tied around her waist. She could throw it, snare one of the rabbits and carry it back to her mother. But no, instead, she stood up and kept walking. She knew there were better things to eat, more filling, more flavorful things, if she could just find them. But the field was bare, the bushes empty, the trees barren. The wind screamed in her ears, urging her on, taunting her with the promise of warmth and food. And finally, she found it, a clump of wild onions poking up through the frost, tough and leathery. She dug her fingers into the cold earth, pulled them free and crammed them into her mouth. Their strong, pungent flavor filled her with sudden energy. She gathered handfuls and shoved them into her pockets, tied her hair back, tucked the onion bunch into the waistband of her skirt, and ran. She ran until she could smell the familiar scent of wood smoke curling from the chimney of her home. The wind had died down and a blanket of quiet settled over the land. The sky was clear, the sun bright, the snow sparkling. Everything was beautiful. And she knew she would be okay because spring was coming, the ice was breaking, and no matter what the wind might say, hunger could never defeat her spirit. And then one day, miraculously, there was bread. But before there is food, there is dirt, and this is the color of the soil. It is brown, it is uneven, it is endless, and it is here that the story of bread began, not in the oven, but right here in the ground. The seed is small, almost invisible. It is carried in the pocket of a farmer's coat. The seed is planted, covered with soil, and then the farmer walks away for months. What happens next is up to the sky. Farmers could not control the weather. They could not make it rain. They could not keep the snow away. There was only waiting. Then one day, miraculously, there was green, a shoot pushing through the soil, reaching for the sun. The farmer's work was just beginning, plowing by hand or ox. The plow is wood, the blade is iron. The force comes from shoulders, knotted and creased with age, or from a beast straining at the bit. It is always slow, it is always hard. The soil does not give easily. Sometimes the ground is hard as iron, sometimes it is sticky like clay. Rocks and weeds are stubborn things. They do not want to be turned. They have been here for a long time and they do not care about the coming grain. But the land must be turned over and over until it is fine and smooth like a baby's skin. Then and only then can the tiny seed be cast into the furrows. The land is big and the hours are long. There are hundreds of acres to plow, then thousands, and the seasons move on. Soon the days are hot and still, the air is thick and the sweat runs down the back and the neck. There is no rest from the sun. At midday the workers stop. They eat their meager lunch, then they lie on the warm soil and they wait for the sun to lose its strength. In spring the earth is full of promise. In summer the earth is full of life. It is ready. Now the rains come and wash away the dust. Now the wind comes and bend the young stalks. Now the storms come and threaten to tear the plants from the ground. If the crops fail, there will be hunger. If the crops fail, there will be despair. If the crops fail, there will be war. Every stalk that bends under the weight of grain is a prayer answered. Every golden head that sways in the breeze is a song of thanks. Plant in the spring, pray in the summer, harvest in the fall. Survive in the winter, repeat forever. But what if the winter is long and the harvest is short? What if the flour is stiff and the bread is hard? There will be gnawing in the belly, fever at night, and the faces of children will be thin. No one remembers lean years like the mice in the wall, but every farmer knows them well. Behind every loaf, there are lean years stored. In the end, it is a miracle that there is bread, miracle of the earth, miracle of the rain, miracle of the sun, miracle of calloused hands, miracle of endless patience. It is a miracle of sharing. See how the farmer gives his grain to the miller so he can grind it fine. See how the baker takes that flour and makes something new. And see how the family gathers around the table, how they pass the bread, how they share it all. But the earth does not give easily. It does not give enough. There are seasons when the earth is angry. She remembers the winters of famine, the summers of thirst. Sometimes she refuses to give barley. Sometimes she only has rye to give. Sometimes she only has oats. Wheat is a gift from the gods. It is beautiful, it is bountiful, it is rare. It is kept for the king or the priest, or maybe it is used to pay the tax. The farmer does not choose what he plants what he can. He chooses nothing, only what will grow. Gathering by hand, the blade is dull, the hands are raw, each stalk is bent, each sheaf is tied tight. Nothing is wasted. It is a tough and dangerous job. Storms can scatter the grain. Animals come to gobble the kernels. The farmer works fast. He must beat the others. The race is against the wind and the rain. A single stalk is worth a single prayer. A single prayer is worth a single loaf. What is left after the prayers are said? What is left after the songs are sung? What is left after the harvest moon is gone? What is left after the fields are bare and the cart is full? What is left after the animals are fed and the people are full? What is left after the flour is sifted and the dough is made? What is left after the bread is baked and the oven is cold? What is left after the first bite, after the second bite, after the third bite? What is left after the crust is picked clean, after the crumbs are picked up, after the very last crumb is gone? Barley. Barley is the most common grain. It feeds the most people. It is the cheapest grain. It is the poor man's bread. It is coarse and hard. It is the staff of life, but it is not very good. Rye. Rye grows in cold places. It grows through the snow. It grows where the soil is hard and thin. It is strong and dark. It is bitter and heavy. It lasts a long time, but it does not taste good. Oats. Oats fill the bowl. Oats make the porridge. Oats sweeten the milk. Oats feed the horse. They pull the plough in the spring, they carry the grain in the fall, they work all year. And at the end, they eat the oats. Wheat. Wheat is rare. Wheat is precious. Wheat is golden. The wheat fields wave like the hair of 1,000 girls. Each ear is a crown. Each grain is a jewel. The best for the king, the best for the queen, the best for the wedding feast, the best for the winner. In the city, they do not know where the bread comes from. They do not know how hard it is to make one small loaf. For them, it is a simple thing, cheap and easy. It grows on shelves in dark corners. In the city, it is the baker who is the hero. He owns the ovens. He owns the flour. He owns the yeast. He owns the bread. He sells it warm and fat, and they think it is magic. In the village, they know better. They know that the bread comes from the earth. They know the name of the soil. They know the feel of the grain. They know the smell of the field. They know the taste of the seed. They plant the seed, and they know that it will be bread. You can see the bread growing in the field. You can see the bread bending in the wind. You can see the bread ripening in the sun. You can see the bread waving in the storm. You can see the bread falling in the rain. You can see the bread standing tall and proud. You can see the bread ready to be harvested. Who makes the bread? Who is the hero of the bread? Is it the farmer or the miller? Is it the baker or the cook? Or is it the grain itself, the silent hero of the soil, the one that carries the starches and proteins, the vitamins and minerals, the one that contains the very essence of life? Is it the grain that is the true hero of the bread? Hello there, it's me, number 4. Then the women came in. They did not speak. They knew better than to speak out of turn. First, they took the grain, they dried it, then they kept it safe. Did you know if you leave grain out too long, mold will eventually take everything? Does the rat? Does the rat? Yes, the rat. Also, time is the thief. The hardest thing to steal is time. It goes so fast. Before you know it, it's gone. Then the grain was ground. It turned into flour. Teeth turned into dust. The masters needed their teeth for chewing. Their teeth were hard. Their teeth were used every day. The teeth are still used today. I bet you use them when you grind your teeth in your sleep. Oh, yes. The masters are no more. The millstones are. One above, one below. The grain becomes powder. The master owns the mill. He owns your food. You take what's left. No one asks why. No one asks how much. No one asks anything. This was the law. The only question was, do you have any grain to trade? This was the way of the world. I would like to show you a different way, a way where the people owned the means of production, a way where we are not dependent on anyone, a way where we can all work together, a way where we could get ahead. But this isn't a story about the way things could be or should be. It's a story about the way things are. Now, not everyone had access to a mill. Many people had stones. Women ground each day on their knees. They ground in silence. Do you hear the difference? They ground in silence. Each day they ground, they prayed. They prayed for rain. They prayed for sunshine. They prayed for the safety of their children. They prayed for a savior. Sometimes they sang. They sang songs of the old days, of the good days. They sang songs of hope. But most of the time they ground in silence. The field is far, but the kitchen is near. The path from one to the other is many hours. It's also hunger. The grain is ground. The flour is stored. But flour alone is not a meal. Flour alone cannot sustain life. Flour alone cannot feed the children. Flour alone cannot grow new life. The flour needs to be cooked. It needs to be mixed. It needs to be shaped. It needs to be heated. It needs to be kneaded. It needs to rise. It needs to be seasoned. It needs to be salted. It needs to be eaten. Let us enter the kitchen. If one can call it that, let us enter the kitchen. Can you imagine how big it must have been? All the women entered the kitchen. They entered without speaking. They also didn't ask questions. They knew what to do. Some women held babies. They walked carefully. Some women carried water. They hummed quietly. Some women stirred. Others waited. Some women cleaned. Others chopped. Some women cut. Others watched. Some women mixed. Others listened. Some women kneaded. Others thought. Some women baked. Others hoped. Some women watched. Others dreamed. Some women served. others wondered. Some women ate, others planned. There were a lot of women. There were a few men. The men knew how to start the fire. The men knew how to keep the fire going. The men also knew how to protect the community. The men protected the community from intruders. The men protected the community from animals. The men also protected the community from themselves. The men were leaders. The men were thinkers. The men were providers. The men were strong. The men were brave. The men were warriors. The men were also hunters. Imagine waking up before sunrise. Imagine seeing the dew drops on the grass. Imagine hearing the birds singing. Imagine smelling the flowers blooming. Imagine feeling the breeze on your skin. Now imagine doing all of that while carrying a basket full of grain. That was the reality for some. That was the reality for many. You wake up early because you have to walk to the mill. You have to wait in line. You have to grind your grain. You have to carry it back home. You have to cook for your family. You have to cook for yourself. You have to eat quickly because you have to clean the pots. You have to gather the ingredients. You have to walk to the market. You have to sell your goods. You have to buy what you need. You have to walk back home. You have to care for your children. You have to care for the elderly. You have to pray for a better day. No, you don't have to do any of that. Actually, you do. We all do. You see, this is a story about all of us. It's a story about our lives. It's about our struggles, our routines, our habits, our traditions, our responsibilities, our past, our present, and our future. Some of us wake up early. Some of us have to walk to the store. Some of us have to wait in line. Some of us have to bake bread. Some of us have to take care of our parents. Some of us have to take care of our kids. Some of us have to go to school. Some of us have to go to work. Some of us have to drive to the office. Some of us have to sit at a desk. Some of us have to type on a keyboard. Some of us have to stare at a screen. Some of us have to watch the clock. Some of us have to eat lunch at our desk. Some of us have to pick up our kids. Some of us have to make dinner. Some of us have to take care of our parents. Some of us have to read bedtime stories. Some of us have to tuck our kids in bed. Some of us have to say our prayers. Some of us have to look at the stars. We live busy lives, but somehow we always find time to watch TV. We find time to scroll down social media. We find time to play games. We find time to watch videos. We find time to chat with friends. We find time to talk about the good old days. We find time to talk about the future. We find time to talk about our dreams. We find time to talk about our plans. We find time to complain. We find time to blame. We find time to hate. We find time to fight. We find time to destroy. We find time to lie. We find time to cheat. We find time to kill. If we can find time for all of that, why can't we find time to educate ourselves? Why can't we find time to help others? Why can't we find time to be kind? Why can't we find time to be loving? Why can't we find time to be free? See, life isn't about finding time. Life is about making time. We can always find time to watch a movie. We can always find time to play a game. We can always find time to eat. We can always find time to sleep. But can we find time to learn something new? Can we find time to challenge the system? Can we find time to stand up for what we believe in? Can we find time to be happy? Can we find time to be ourselves? It's easy to sit here and say you should find time, you should make time. But the truth is, life is already too full. Life is already too packed. Life is already too busy. Life is already too complicated. Life is already too stressful. Life is already too sad. Life is already too lonely. Life is already too dark. And if you add one more thing to your plate, one more thing to worry about, one more thing to think about, one more thing to do, one more thing to be, one more thing to have, one more thing to achieve, one more thing to become, one more thing to be concerned about, one more thing to put on your to-do list, guess what happens? You burn out, you break down, you give up, you quit, you stop trying, you stop believing, you stop living. We're already stretched too thin. We're already too tired. We're already too weak. So the next time someone tells you to find time, remember this video. Remember that we don't find time, we make time. And the only way we can do that is by taking time away from all the other things that don't matter. The only way we can do that is by taking time away from all the noise. The only way we can do that is by taking time away from all the distractions. The only way we can do that is by taking time away from everything except what truly matters. I want to thank you for watching this video. I want to thank you for spending this time with me. I want to thank you for listening to my story. I want to thank you for being a part of this community. And I want to remind you that you are amazing. Keep being you. Keep being awesome. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now. I'm certain that there are things I do not know about Baba Ganoush, but this much I know. There are no plates, only bowls. Welcome to my channel. I am a professional at making coffee and tea. My work has been featured in dozens of books and magazines and online. I've even spoken on television a few times, but this is not what I'm known for. Some know me best for teaching others how to make coffee. Others know me from writing about tea. Many know me for my desserts or my Persian cooking. And while all these things are true, they don't tell my story. My story began with a girl who lived in a country where plates didn't exist. In this place, all food was served in bowls. Bowls made of wood, big wooden bowls filled with broth and grain and shared by many people around a table. Bowls held the warmth of the hearth without sharp edges to cut hands or lips. For generations, every morning the Baba Ganoush woke up before sunrise and stoked the fire in the hearth. Slowly, carefully, they would coax the flames to life again and bring the water to a boil. Then the girls would come running, gathering wood and tending the fire until their cheeks were flushed with the effort. The boys would be out hunting, trapping or fishing, bringing back meat or fish to be cooked in the great iron pot hanging over the hearth. Once the water boiled, the Baba Ganoush would add grain, wheat or barley or whatever they had. They would stir the grain into the boiling water and then wait. They would wait until the water absorbed all of the flour and became something thick and pasty and hot. They never knew exactly how long that would take. It depended on the grain and the weather and so many other things. But they waited patiently because they knew that when it was done, they would have food. They would survive another day. This is food, and it takes time. Most days, the youngest girl would be sent to gather herbs from the fields outside the village. Wild onions and mint and sorrel and stinging nettles, anything she could find to spice the grain and give it flavor. If she were lucky, she might also find roots, wild carrots and parsnips and beets. She would scrub the dirt off the vegetables and throw them into the pot. If she were very lucky, she might find fruit, berries or plums or apples or whatever wasn't rotten. She would wash her hands in cold water, then reach into the pot and stir it all together. She would add whatever she found to the pot and hope that it would taste good, hope that it would not be bland or gross. Sometimes it tasted wonderful, better than anything she could have imagined. Sometimes it tasted terrible, she had no idea why. Sometimes it was sour and sometimes it was sweet. Sometimes it made her mouth tingle and sometimes it made her want to spit. The only thing she knew for sure was that it would change every day, just like the girl who gathered the herbs and vegetables changed every day. Years passed. Girls grew into women, and still they stirred the pot. They added whatever they could find to the pot and hoped for the best. They learned to read the sky and the land and predict the weather. They learned which plants could help and which ones would hurt. They learned when to pick the fruit and when to leave the vegetables in the ground. They learned to listen to the river as it ran by. They learned to read the tracks in the mud by the river and the paths through the tall grass. They learned the language of the land, and it taught them how to live. One day, a traveler arrived in the village. He had traveled far, and he was tired and hungry and thirsty. The villagers welcomed him with open arms and fed him food from the pot. When it was time for him to go, he asked if he could have some food to take with him on his journey. The villagers happily gave him some of the food from the pot and sent him on his way. The traveler continued on his journey, and eventually he came across another village. Again, he was tired and hungry and thirsty, so the villagers welcomed him with open arms and fed him food from their pot. When it was time for him to go, he asked if he could have some food to take with him on his journey. The villagers happily gave him some of the food from their pot and sent him on his way. This happened over and over and over again. The traveler visited many villages, and each one welcomed him with open arms and fed him food from their pot. And everywhere he went, the traveler told the villagers about the wonderful food he had eaten in the previous village, about how delicious it was and how full it kept him. Everywhere he went, the traveler told the villagers that they needed to change their ways. They needed to stop serving their food on plates, only bowls. They needed to stop cutting their food into pieces, everything whole. They needed to learn to make their food last all day long. Not soup, not stew, something in between. Thick enough to fill a belly, thin enough to stretch to many mouths. The traveler told them all this and more, but the villagers couldn't understand. Their ears were closed to his words. One evening, the traveler returned to his own village. As he approached his house, he noticed a strange light in the window. Curious, he walked closer. Looking through the window, he saw the most amazing sight. His daughter was sitting on the floor in front of a small pot. She had gathered wild onions and mint and sorrel and stinging nettles. She was stirring the pot and adding whatever she could find to it. And it occurred to him that she was making a soup. He pushed open the door and walked inside. "My darling," he said, "what are you doing?" "I'm making supper," she replied without looking up. "But you're making a soup. You're making food the way the stranger taught you." She looked up at him, surprised. "How did you know?" "Because you're making soup," he said. "No, I'm not," she replied, confused. "I'm making supper." And in that moment, the traveler understood. He realized that his journey had changed him. It had made him hungry for new foods and new experiences, but it hadn't changed his daughter. Her ears were not closed to the world, but open and listening to the river as it ran by. Her eyes were not blind to the world, but reading the tracks in the mud by the river and the path through the tall grass. Her tongue was not too busy to taste the world, but learning the language of the land, and it was teaching her how to live. The traveler sat down beside his daughter and watched as she stirred the pot. She added whatever she could find to it and hoped that it would taste good. She hoped that it wouldn't be bland or gross. Sometimes it tasted wonderful, better than anything she could have imagined. Sometimes it tasted terrible. She had no idea why. Sometimes it was sour and sometimes it was sweet. Sometimes it made her mouth tingle and sometimes it made her want to spit. The traveler watched his daughter and he felt a sense of pride and love wash over him. He knew that she was more than just his daughter. She was becoming a Baba Ganoush, a keeper of the flame, a guardian of the hearth, a woman who could feed her family and her people for generations to come. Years passed. The traveler died and his daughter continued to cook over the hearth. Every morning she woke up before sunrise and stoked the fire in the hearth. Slowly, carefully, she would coax the flames to life again and bring the water to a boil. All day the pot stayed warm over the hearth. No one was served food. It was gathered. Everyone helped themselves. The food was not set on the table. It was taken from the pot and shared all day long. If you were to ask me how to describe this meal that I'm having right now, what would be the best way? Well, there are many ways to describe a meal. You could talk about its appearance, the shape of the plate, the color of the food, the texture of the sauce, the size of the portions, the arrangement of the dish. You could also talk about its taste, the sweetness of the fruit, the acidity of the vegetables, the saltiness of the broth, the spiciness of the chili. Or you could discuss its smell, the aroma of the spices, the fragrance of the herbs, the steam rising from the soup. You could even talk about the sound the dish makes, the sizzle of the bacon, the crunch of the chips, the slurp of the noodles. But for this meal, none of those descriptions seem quite right. This is not just a dish, it is part of my life. It has become an inseparable part of who I am. I was born into this, I grew up with this, so describing it is not enough. Understanding it is necessary. There is a logic to it, a system to it, a philosophy even, one that has been handed down to me by generations past, and which I in turn will pass on to the next generation. There are 7 things you need to know about this meal. Number 1, spoons. Here we eat with spoons. In our family, you always eat with a spoon. There isn't a dish that you can't eat with a spoon. A plate may come to the table with something on it, but the moment you are served, it is transferred to a bowl. There is no reason for this. It is simply how we do things. It is what we have always done. When I visit my grandparents, they use their old porcelain spoons, each of them with a different design from the ones that I have. Yet both of them serve the same purpose. They scoop. And so when we sit together at the table, we all use the same utensils to consume the same food in the same manner. We do not share the spoons. Each one of us has their own, yet we all use them in the same way. Number 2, hands. At our table, you don't touch your food. The only time your hands touch the dish is when you pick it up to eat. Before that, they don't touch it. They remain pure. This is especially important before a meal. You never wipe your hands on your clothes or any other part of your body. You wash your hands thoroughly with water and soap. Then you dry them with a clean towel, and only then do you touch the food. Number 3, the order of eating. First eats the father, then the mother, and lastly, the children. It doesn't matter if the child is older than the mother. It doesn't matter if the child is taller than the father. First, the father eats, then the mother, and lastly, the children. Number 4, salt. Salt is rare. Fat is sacred. Salt is precious. It is a condiment that we reserve only for special occasions. For everyday meals, we do not use salt. Sometimes a soup or a broth will already contain salt within it, but adding salt to our food is something reserved only for special guests or for the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Fat, on the other hand, is sacred. The fattiest cuts of meat are always reserved for the elders. The fattiest pieces of fish are given to the head of the household. The fattiest ingredients are always treated with respect and care. Their presence in a dish means fortune. Their absence is normal. Number 5, leftovers. Nothing is thrown away. Nothing is ever fresh. Yesterday becomes today and likely tomorrow. Every ingredient has its purpose. Every ingredient has its function. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is ever thrown away. What is left over finds its way back onto the table. Even if a dish tastes better the second time around, the truth is that it tastes exactly the same. No one says that leftovers are bad. In fact, most of us prefer to eat leftovers because it means that there was something extra yesterday. It means that someone had a good day. It means that someone came home with extra food for everyone. Leftovers are proof that the previous day was good. And since no one wants to tempt fate, we don't get rid of leftovers. We always eat them the next day. And if they are still around the following day after that, well, then we eat them then. Nothing is ever fresh. Everything is leftover. Even the bread we eat today was baked yesterday. Even the tomatoes we add to our salads were picked a day ago. Even the fish we eat tonight was caught yesterday. Freshness implies that something is missing. It implies that something was not available yesterday. Freshness means scarcity. And since we do not believe in scarcity, we do not look for fresh ingredients. We eat leftovers. Number 6, the meal. There are no courses, there is no ceremony. The meal is a pause in labor. It is a chance to regain strength. It is a brief moment where we stop what we are doing to eat, to rest, and to prepare ourselves for more work. After we eat, we go back to work. For some of us, the meal is the highlight of the day, the most exciting thing that happens. And so we savor it, we appreciate it, we enjoy it. For others, the meal is a mere interruption in the flow of work, and so they rush through it, hoping to get it over and done with. For some, the meal is a moment of reunion, a chance to talk to those they love. And so they use this time to catch up with one another. For others, the meal is a solitary affair, a quiet moment of reflection and solitude. And so they eat in silence, lost in thought. The meal is not an event. It is a moment, it is a pause, a break, a chance to rest and to regain strength. Then we go back to work. Number 7, hope. Food does not delight, it allows. To stand, to lift, to keep going. A good meal is one that leaves you wanting more. A great meal is one that sustains you. A perfect meal is one that gets you through the day. Food is not something that we think about. Food is not something that we obsess over. We simply eat because we must. And the only hope that we place in it is the hope that it will allow us to stand, to lift, to keep going. The bowl is empty, but the fire still burns. The day is long and hunger will return. Now let us look at what fed the few while others starved. It seems almost impossible that such a reality can exist in our world today, and yet it does. More than 800 million people worldwide don't have enough to eat. It is hard to imagine a world like this, a world where some have too much and others don't have anything at all. But it is a reality that we must face every day. And what is the solution? Is it charity? Is it government aid? Is it fair trade? Is it local production? Is it the responsibility of the producer, of the transporter, of the distributor, of the retailer, of the consumer? Who is responsible for ensuring that everyone has access to good food? Are we all responsible or no one? This series explores the stories behind the food we eat and the impact it has on our lives, our society, and our planet. Watch as we uncover the hidden stories and forgotten trades that bring us our daily sustenance. Join us in this journey of discovery and learn about the fascinating origins of the food we eat and the vital role it plays in our world. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be reading from The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is Book 2, The Two Towers, Part 3, Chapter 10. We're going to begin right at the beginning there with a poem called A Hall of Stone and Smoke. The room is vast, cold stone below, heavy beams above, smoke hangs in the air. Feast begins with fire, food as display. It is not for hunger, it is for power. Roasted beasts, pies with live birds, a show, dozens of dishes, not one meal, but many, fish, fowl, fruit, meat, sauces thick and strange, rare, rich, endless, servants in shadows, they bring, they pour, they bow, they vanish, a feast for the lords, a blur for the hands that serve it, forks unused, knives slice, fingers tear, bread is a plate, hands do the work. Etiquette is show. I'm going to read this poem again, but I want you all to listen for something specific, something about the way these lines are written, how they rhyme, where the stresses fall. You may notice that it sounds like somebody speaking, a singing, perhaps even an incantation or a charm. And if you have read Tolkien before, specifically The Lord of the Rings, you might recognize some of these characteristics from another place in his work. Yes, this poem has the same cadence and rhythm as Bilbo Baggins' song, My Far Away, which is used to lull Frodo to sleep when he was just a young lad. In fact, this poem is set to the same tune as My Far Away. And while Tolkien didn't write the music, if you listen to Howard Shore's score, you will hear how he uses My Far Away here to foreshadow the connection between Frodo and Bilbo and their respective journeys. In this moment, Sam is describing the great feasts that are held in the halls of Gondor at Minas Tirith. He says it is a blur to him and the other servants, because really they are only there to serve the food. And although it is described as rare and rich and endless, they don't get to enjoy it. It is only a distraction for them. Just as Gandalf said to Frodo, "When you feast with friends merry and at ease, there is much laughter, and the stories flow, and the tables are laden, and the cups are high." There is a little joy in such things now, Frodo thought, for those who have to prepare them, even as there is little mirth for the cook and the scullion, however good the victuals be. Yet there must be victuals, and someone to prepare them. And so, while the kings and princes and lords enjoy themselves, having great sport and drinking deep, there are others that must cater to their needs. And perhaps nowhere is this more true than in our own world. When you walk into a restaurant, you see the finished product. The chef has labored over each dish. Hours were spent perfecting its preparation. Every sauce, every garnish has been placed with intentionality. All of this work is done out of sight. The customer does not see the tools being sterilized, the prep work being done, the oil being heated, and the ingredients being measured and mixed until the perfect recipe is realized. This is why I think it is important for us to remember those that are behind the scenes, the unsung heroes and heroines, the ones that make our lives better, more beautiful, more flavorful, but never receive the recognition they deserve. I think it is also important to recognize how much effort goes into making our lives what they are. We can complain that our job is boring or tedious or without meaning, and yet we do it anyway because someone has to. Someone has to prepare the food. Someone has to serve it up with a smile. Someone has to keep the lights on and the water running. Someone has to build the roads and the bridges and the machines that allow us to travel from place to place. Someone has to take care of the sick. Someone has to teach the children. Someone has to tend the garden. Someone has to write the laws and protect the weak. Someone has to dream and create and invent and innovate. Someone has to love us when we are unlovable. Someone has to believe in us when we've lost faith in ourselves. But the reality is no one has to. People choose to. And it is this choice that makes the world go round. If we are lucky, we find people who enjoy what they do, who find satisfaction in a job well done, who know that their work matters, that it makes a difference. In doing what they do, we can also find people who find joy in giving, whose happiness comes from making others happy. And sometimes we find people who both enjoy what they do and get great satisfaction from knowing they made a difference in the life of another person. We can all strive to be more like these people. We can all try to find ways to do what we do better, more efficiently, more lovingly, more generously. We can all look for ways to add beauty to the world, however small that may seem. I don't know what your job is, but I do know that you are needed. Someone chose to do what they do because they believed it mattered, because they believed it was worth it. Maybe you are the one who makes someone else's day just a little bit better. Maybe you are the one who brings a smile to a stranger's face or a helping hand to someone in need. Maybe you are the one who shares a story or a laugh or a song. Maybe you are the one who makes a delicious meal or tends the fire or provides shelter. Maybe you are the one who listens when no one else is willing. Maybe you are the one who cares. And in doing so, you make the world a better place for having known you. Thank you all for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed this reading from The Lord of the Rings. If you did, please feel free to leave a like, to subscribe to the channel, and to share your thoughts in a comment below. I will see you all again next week. Until then, you stay safe and I will remember you. Die. When we think of a medieval banquet hall, what do we see? Long tables laden with food, goblets of wine, lords and ladies feasting. But behind this picture of plenty, did everyone really get to eat? Did women have equal access to food? Were some foods considered unworthy? What were the rules around serving and eating? And most importantly, how much food was actually wasted? Welcome to Life in the Middle Ages. Today, we're going to look at what happened to leftovers in the Middle Ages. Make sure to stick around until the end, where we find out why the fish got wise. Music, games and noise. Lutes echo, dogs bark, people laugh too loud. It is not quiet. It is never still. In a medieval manor hall, entertainment was the main event during dinner. Minstrels would sing and tell tales, while jesters would make fools of themselves. Lords might challenge each other to contests of strength or skill, while ladies competed in the art of gentlewomanly behavior. The noise could be deafening, making it difficult to hear yourself think, and the constant movement could be exhausting to watch. In fact, dinner parties often lasted for hours, sometimes even days. So if you were invited to a medieval feast, be prepared for anything, whether you wanted to or not. Spices from the east, cinnamon, clove, saffron, gold turned into taste. They eat wealth to show they can. Waste without shame. What is not eaten is thrown. Trays of scraps. Food enough for 10 left to rot, eating until ill. They eat beyond hunger, beyond need. They sweat, they groan, they boast. To be invited to a royal feast was a great honor. After all, it meant that the king or queen had chosen you to join them in their presence. However, the reality of these feasts was that they were more like a battle of wills than a friendly gathering. You were expected to eat as much as possible and not waste a single morsel. In fact, it was considered rude to push away your plate when it was empty. And if you couldn't finish everything on your plate, you would have to explain why. The king would ask questions like, "Is the venison overcooked? Is the bread stale?" And if you answered yes, the cook would be put to death. That's right. If you didn't like your food, someone else would pay the price. No wonder everyone tried to eat everything. A silence that follows. The fire dies low. The room dims. Only crumbs remain. And silence. At last. When the feasting was over, there would be a moment of silence as everyone digested their enormous meal. This was the only time during the dinner party when talking was not encouraged. In fact, it was seen as impolite to break the silence. Everyone would sit quietly, occasionally sipping on a glass of wine or ale. Sometimes this silence could last for hours, but eventually, when everyone was ready to leave, the king would rise from his throne and announce, "It is time to go." For the few, abundance. For the many, nothing. Medieval banquets were not exactly known for their healthy portions. In fact, they were notorious for their excess. You could find all kinds of wild game on the menu, as well as exotic fruits and spices. There was always enough food for everyone, but only a select few got to enjoy it. Most of the time, the food was served to whoever the king wanted it to go to. So if you weren't in the king's good graces, you might not get anything at all. But it wasn't just about being in the king's good graces. There were also rules about who could eat certain types of food. For example, fish was usually reserved for Fridays and other holy days, and poultry was only for the nobility, so if you were a commoner, your options were pretty limited. Not all food was eaten in halls. Some came with rules, with rituals, with faith. Let us enter the world of fasting. And the fish that replaced meat. It was a tradition for Christians to fast during Lent, the 40 days leading up to Easter. During this time, they gave up certain foods, especially meat, and replaced them with fish. This led to an increase in the popularity of fish dishes during this season. Fish became a symbol of sacrifice and self-discipline, and people believed that by eating fish, they were showing their commitment to their faith. But there was more to the choice of fish than just religious significance. Fish was also a way of getting protein without having to eat meat. Meat was expensive and hard to come by, so fish was a more affordable option for those who couldn't afford meat. Fish was also seen as a more humble food than meat. It wasn't associated with luxury or indulgence, so it was perfect for a time of fasting. For example, recipes that used leftover fish were very popular during Lent. One such recipe was a dish made with fried fish and leftover vegetables. The fish would be fried until it was crispy and then served over a bed of wilted greens. It was a simple but nutritious dish that was perfect for a Lenten supper. Another popular recipe was a fish pie. This dish consisted of layers of fish, potatoes, and vegetables topped with a creamy sauce. It was hearty and satisfying, yet still light enough to be suitable for a fast. But the fish got wise. One day a group of fish were swimming in the ocean when they heard a commotion on the surface. They looked up to see a large fishing boat with nets and hooks. The fish were scared, but one brave fish decided to investigate. He swam to the surface and peeked over the edge of the boat. "What are you doing?" he asked the fisherman. "We're trying to catch some fish," replied the fisherman. "Can't you see our nets?" "Why do you want to catch us?" asked the fish. "We don't do any harm." "We want to eat you," said the fisherman. "You're delicious fried up with a little butter." The fish were horrified. They had heard stories of fishermen and their hooks before, but they never thought it would happen to them. They quickly swam away from the boat, warning the others of the danger. From that day on, the fish were more careful. They avoided the surface of the water and stayed away from any boats they saw. They knew that humans were not to be trusted, and they were determined to stay safe. They shared their knowledge with the younger fish, teaching them how to spot a threat and how to escape. The fish population thrived because of their caution, and the fishermen were never able to catch them all. Have you ever heard of the saying, "Eat more fish"? And if so, do you know how it became part of our everyday sayings? Here in this story, we'll try to find an answer to that question. A bit ago, one of my viewers sent me a comment. It was about food, but not just any food. It was about a special kind of fish. He asked me, did Jesus eat catfish? Of course, I had no idea what he was talking about, so I had to go back to the scriptures. These are the only two references to fish in all four Gospels. They tell us that Jesus ate fish on 2 occasions. Let's read them. "And when the Lord did manifest himself again to his disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, as he was before, they did all as he bid them, and did cast in their nets for 105 barrels of great fish, and for the multitude they did feed them." This is how Luke tells us about the miraculous catch of fish John writes about. "Again Jesus saith unto them, I am he. When he had spoken, he saith unto Peter, Put out thy hand into the net, and what thou findest bind. He went down into the ship, Simon Peter following him. And when he was come into the ship, Simon Peter, seeing the net full of fishes, he said, Master, we have toiled all the night, and have now taken nothing. He saith unto him, Launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a draught. And when they had done this, they enclosed a great multitude of fishes, and their net was breaking. Do you see anything strange here? No, maybe you don't. And perhaps there is nothing strange at all. Maybe this is what happened. Jesus wanted to eat fish, and he told Peter to catch fish for him. But this is another theory. Let's look at it closer. Let's start with the first miracle. Jesus tells his disciples to cast their nets into the water. He repeats this 3 times, and then he tells them to open their eyes and look at how many fish they caught. After reading these verses, many people conclude that Jesus loved fish very much, or that he missed fish while he was in the desert. But we cannot draw any conclusions like this, because there is another detail. We can also see it in Luke's Gospel, and that is that those fish were used to feed the crowds. For that reason, I believe that Jesus didn't eat fish on that occasion. But on the second occasion, everything was different. Jesus tells Peter to cast his net into the deep water again, and he repeats this 3 times, and then they catch a lot of fish. But this time, only Peter and Jesus were in the boat. And then Jesus invites Peter to follow him, and immediately after they land the boat, Jesus says, Simon, son of Jonas, are you ready to cast your nets into the deep for a catch? Jesus is speaking to Peter. Here Jesus doesn't say, hey Peter, let's go and catch some fish. No, Jesus speaks to Peter and asks him if he wants to have fish for lunch. That's why I think that Jesus did eat fish on that occasion. But why do we need to analyze every single word and action of Jesus? Why do we need to know what Jesus ate? Yes, there is a reason why. Think of it this way. You want to be friends with someone, right? And you want to get to know this person better. What would you do? You would learn about his likes and dislikes. You would ask him about his favorite things. And if he shares that with you, then you know him better, right? In the same way, if you want to know Jesus better, you must study everything about him, even the smallest details. There is one more thing we can learn from this story. You know, Peter was a fisherman, and he knew the lakes and rivers and fish. He was the best one to catch fish, but he was poor, and he probably shared his little catch with other fishermen. But on this day, after catching a lot of fish, Peter started to panic. He felt afraid. Why? Because he realized that he wasn't worthy to be with Jesus, and he understood that Jesus knew that very well. But what was Jesus thinking? What was going through his mind? In the boat with Peter, Jesus was silent. But later, he broke the silence and he said, "Simon, son of man, I want you to follow me." After hearing these words, Peter fell down at Jesus' feet and said, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." We can read it like this in Mark's Gospel. And immediately he said to him, "Leave this, Simon, and go, follow me." And he said to him, "I will follow your hearse, Lord, but let me first go and bury my father." Then Jesus said to him, "No man, having put his hand to the plowshare and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." And Peter followed him. From that moment on, Peter left everything and began to follow Jesus. So what is the lesson here? Well, I believe there are at least 3 lessons. First, don't let anything stand between you and Jesus. Anything. Second, when you feel unworthy to be with Jesus, remember that he came to seek and save sinners. And third, don't be afraid to leave the past behind. Jesus promised to help you. Now, I'm sure that you're still wondering, who was that guy who was supposed to die? Well, let's look at Luke's Gospel again. "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded you that he may sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith shall not fail." As you can see, Jesus was speaking about Satan. But what does it mean to sift someone like wheat? To sift means to examine something carefully. In this case, Satan wanted to examine Peter. He wanted to test him. But why? Because Satan thought that Peter would betray Jesus. Jesus knew that, but he said, "I have prayed for you." Jesus knew that Peter would deny him 3 times. Jesus knew everything, but he still prayed for him. But why? The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. Jesus wasn't trying to change Peter's future. He simply prayed that Peter's faith wouldn't fail. In the Bible, there is another event that reminds us of this. Ananias and Sapphira wanted to donate some money to the church, but actually, they wanted to show off. They kept some of the money for themselves and gave the rest of the money to the church. So Peter said, "Why has Satan filled your heart to lie against the Holy Spirit?" And he fell down dead at their feet, and they both died. You can read it in Acts chapter 5, verse 1 to 11. So what does it mean? It means that Satan can use anyone for his purposes, even those who seem faithful. So Jesus prayed for Peter that his faith wouldn't fail, but he didn't promise that Peter would never waver. In fact, later, we can read about it in all 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And when the rooster crowed, Peter remembered Jesus' words and he wept bitterly. But Jesus waited for Peter. And after Peter denied Jesus for the last time, Jesus looked at him and said, "Peter, son of Simon, do you love me more than these?" He said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Feed my lambs." After Peter heard those words, he went out and preached the gospel. So how should we apply all this to our lives? Well, there are at least two lessons. First, don't be afraid to admit your mistakes. Don't try to hide them. And second, even if you fall, God will wait for you. You can always return to Him. Don't be afraid. Remember, my God is in the fish I eat, the air that I breathe, the sun that warms me, the rain that waters me. My God is in the fish I eat, the air that I breathe, the sun that warms me, the rain that waters me. Amen. A smell of fried fish hangs heavy over this kitchen. The year is 1374, and somewhere in England, someone is cooking dinner for a monastery full of hungry men. Now I know what you're thinking. Monasteries are supposed to be places of fasting and penance. Are we about to see a bunch of greedy monks stuffing themselves silly? Well, yes, actually, we are. So, let's cook up some history. Our chef today is the chronicler of the Carant, John of Fordun, who doesn't have so much a recipe book as an account of all the food he ate while traveling around his country. And according to him, this meal is a humble one. It's eel. In fact, it's eel and it's in a basket. In other words, it's a poor man's feast, except it's not really a feast at all. It's just Wednesday. Eels are among the lowest creatures in the Christian moral hierarchy. See, they don't have any bones, and if they slither on land, which they do when they're migrating, they seem to mock the human condition. Eels are slimy, greasy, dark and dirty. They're also, despite their best efforts, ugly, yet they are a delicacy. Not because they taste good, mind you, but because they are expensive. Monks had a complex relationship with eels, often cursing them in their writings, then ordering them from their favorite restaurants. Most followed a strict diet of vegetables and cheap fish, though, so you won't find them here. But every now and then, something special came along, like a gift from a generous bishop or, fish poisoning. In 1325, the citizens of London were sent reeling when a shipment of imported fish arrived and promptly killed dozens of people. London authorities blamed the monks of St. Mary's Spital for the disaster, and the monks blamed, well, eels. According to the monks, the poisoned fish was a cruel trick played by Satan himself, while Londoners said, "Dude, you poisoned your own fish because you wanted to kill us." Everyone agreed that this was bad, and so that was that. But back to our monk, whose humility is getting him closer to God. He's made a virtue of lack and a virtue of plainness, because eating well is a sin, especially when the world outside these four walls is going hungry. And there is no greater sin than wasting food. Now, the Carant were a bit extreme in their dietary choices, mostly because they were a bit extreme in general. Founded in the 12th century by the military monk Henry, the order required poverty, chastity, and obedience of its members. They were supposed to live simple lives, working hard and seeking peace, and they really committed to that, even building their own hospitals and schools. However, they weren't exactly known for their cooking skills. In fact, they were known for not cooking at all. When food was provided, that is, because they didn't have much money, most of their meals were unleavened bread and beer. And when they did get something tasty, they spread it on their bread. That's right, this is the origin of the English sandwich. Our monk has another virtue to count today too. He's achieved the elusive virtue of silence. Eating without speaking shows how devoutly he is praying inside. His mouth, his fellow Carant might say, is truly blessed. For centuries, monks had been expected to eat in silence as part of their religious discipline, though some orders took that more seriously than others. One way to guarantee silence during meals was simply to remove all food that made noise. Raw vegetables were fine, but apples, pears and plums would cause choking fits and slurping noises. Nuts and dried fruit were okay, but grapes and berries would dribble down chins and crackle to the floor. Bread was blessed, silent sustenance, but cheese would squeak and bacon would, well, bacon. Meat was out of the question, not just because it was noisy, but because it was considered wasteful. As we've seen, protein is an important part of anyone's diet, but especially a Caranites. That's because of the amount of manual labor they did. And although Jesus turned water into wine, monks knew better than to turn beer into meat juice. So they did the next best thing. They drank vinegar. Vinegar was a common drink throughout Europe and the Mediterranean and was popular among Christians because it was associated with Christ's blood. In fact, the word vinegar comes from the Latin verb vinum a, meaning to be dear. Though it wasn't very tasty, monks often preferred vinegar to wine because it was less tempting. After all, the Bible warns against drunkenness, but it doesn't specifically mention non-alcoholic beverages. To add flavor to their goblets, monks experimented with herbs and spices, turning vinegar into a sort of medieval sangria. Our monk is having a party. He's brought his friends together to enjoy a good meal and even better company. They've shared stories and jokes, they've raised their cups and lowered their voices, and now it's time for bed. The rule against laughter and mirth was a big one. Monks were supposed to be somber, quiet, and focused on the divine. They certainly weren't supposed to be drinking, telling jokes, swapping gossip, or heaven forbid, dancing. If they did, their food would turn to sin in their mouths. But parties happen whether the monks want them to or not. During the Middle Ages, feasting was a necessary part of life, especially if you were a member of the clergy. Large meals showed wealth and status, and nothing says I'm important like breaking a crust of bread on top of a hog's head. After all, if you're going to prepare a magnificent feast, you might as well make sure everyone knows you're doing it. And why not throw a lavish banquet every now and again? These meals were more than just food. They were a way to honor God. It was called feasting in disguise, and it happened everywhere, from grand halls to small kitchens. Imagine the scene. A great hall lined with long tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats, steaming pies, bowls of fruit, and flagons of spiced wine. There are musicians playing lively tunes, bards singing tales of valor, jesters juggling and acrobats tumbling. Lords and ladies in fine clothes are laughing and talking, exchanging gifts and compliments. It's a celebration of life, of abundance, of the joy of being alive. But look closer. Amidst the revelry, there is something strange going on. The food is not what it seems. The meats are not real, but cleverly shaped pieces of bread and fish. The fruits are not fresh, but wax replicas. The wine is not alcoholic, but sweet cider. And the music is not for entertainment, but for prayer. That's right, this is not a feast at all, it's a fast. And these people are not celebrating, but repenting. They are dressed in the coif and robes of monks, and they are eating only vegetables and fruit. In this world, everything is permitted, even if it isn't necessarily encouraged. After all, it's easier to go from gluttony to temperance than from temperance to gluttony. So while it may look like a party, it's really a penance. While it may sound like music and merriment, it's really a dirge. While it may seem like food, it's really fasting. And it's not just the dishes that are deceptive. It's also the ingredients. For example, cooks could easily turn fish into meaty-looking roasts. Fish, after all, is already a stand-in for meat, since both are animal products. However, few things turned a vegetarian monk's stomach more than the sight of fish, since they didn't want to encourage the use of animals in their services. So chefs would cover the fish with ketchup to hide its telltale shape. Cooks could also serve meatless loaves made of sawdust. Sawdust was a cheap filler and could be dyed to look like anything from eggs to lobster to sausages. Vegetable oil could replace butter and lard in recipes and even give the illusion of fat slowly rendering out of meat. Of course, not every monk was willing to swallow a mouthful of sawdust. Some of the strictest orders gave their food names that were either boring or confusing. At the Abbey of Citeaux, vegetables were called the nourishment of the weak and the food of the lowly. Other meals were given biblical titles like the prophet Samuel or the sacrifice of Isaac, neither of which sounds particularly appetizing. Meanwhile, Cistercian monks referred to their meals as poor man's venison and Lenten meat. They also had a term for their veggie burgers, if you will, honest fare. To avoid temptation, monks sometimes disguised their food to look like something else. Monkfish, which looks like a block of wood, was served as a brick. Eels were skinned and boned, then baked in pastry like a pie. Whole eels were braised in oil and vinegar and served as a single sausage. At the monastery of New Alresford, Brother Thomas Norton wrote down the recipes he learned while in the service of God. He made good use of spices, using ginger and pepper to give soups and stews an exotic flair. He also enjoyed adding saffron to his bread dough, probably because it's yellow. On the other hand, saffron can also mask the taste of sawdust. As for the more valuable ingredients, he used them sparingly, as in one recipe for a pie made of cat meat, where he calls for a mere quarter ounce of cinnamon. Note, this is not an actual recipe, but the equivalent of calling for a dash. If he were writing today, Norton might have titled his collection of recipes something like Fast Food from the Fast Lane, How to Make Monastic Cooking Sexy Again. You could call it a cookbook, but that would imply that monks were cooking. Instead, it's a collection of recipes that monks were served. These recipes are a fascinating window into the world of monastic cooking and the challenges faced by those preparing meals for communities of people with specific dietary needs and restrictions. For example, many of the recipes call for unusual ingredients or techniques that were designed to make the most of limited resources, or to disguise the taste or appearance of certain dishes. For example, several recipes call for the use of sawdust, which was a cheap filler that could be used to stretch ingredients and make more from less. Other recipes use ingredients like plaster or bones to add texture or flavor to dishes, reflecting the resourcefulness of medieval cooks who had to make do with what they had. There's even a recipe for a dish called plaster custard, which calls for the use of plaster as a thickening agent. And that's not a typo. This medieval cook really wanted you to eat plaster. He was probably trying to prevent an outbreak of cannibalism, seeing as how this was the era when humans were considered livestock. Although the recipes may sound strange to modern readers, they reflect the culinary practices of the time period and the specific needs and constraints of the current religious order. Overall, it's a fascinating glimpse into a little-known aspect of medieval life and the ingenuity of those who prepared food for the Carant monks. What began as a trickle of practicality became a flood of necessity. First, they cut out the meat, then they cut out the dairy, then they cut out the eggs. And that's when they found out they needed vitamins. What did monks drink instead of alcohol? Non-alcoholic wine made from boiled apple peelings and grape seeds, vinegar flavored with basil and mint, water mixed with ground cinnamon, warm milk mixed with honey and ginger, tea made from rose petals, herbal infusions such as chamomile and lavender. They fermented pears, cherries, plums, berries and melons. They also brewed cider, which wasn't technically forbidden. In fact, monks were the leading producers of cider in medieval England. But things got complicated when cider production turned into hard cider production. So they gave up on that too. Now, strictly speaking, water wasn't off limits. In fact, Jesus turned water into wine. But sometimes it was dangerous to drink. Remember that whole episode with the poisoned fish? Yeah, that was because someone slipped some pulverized glass into the fish food. In fact, water was often contaminated by sewage, animal carcasses, industrial runoff, and other pollutants, making it a potential source of disease and illness. That's why monks preferred to drink boiled or purified water, which was safer and more palatable. Plus, boiling water was a great way to start a bar fight. Some orders even resorted to drinking urine, which was surprisingly safe to consume and might have helped prevent kidney stones. Don't believe me? Read about it yourself. A long time ago in a land far away, they followed the old ways. Water clear does not mean clean. Still, water hides sickness. Many drank it, many paid the price. Ale as every day. It was not strong, it was not sweet, but it was safe and warm. Each evening, the men would return home from the fields to a loaf of bread and a tankard of ale. Each evening, the women would tend the fire, make sure the ale was ready. For the children too weak to work the fields all day, they would tend the yeast. For the very old who could not remember when their aches began, they would tend the fire and keep watch over the brewing. For without the proper care, the brew could sour and the sickness it brought could last a lifetime. They took their jobs seriously, these women, the making of the ale, for it was more than just drink. It was life, brewing at home. First, the grain was gathered. Then it was threshed and ground, barley and wheat, nut and fruit. The mixture was boiled in a great kettle over the fire. Then it was strained and set aside to cool. Once cool enough to touch, it was transferred to a vessel to ferment. Time to wait, time to watch, time to dream of spring. When the mixture bubbled and sighed, it was ready. To be ale, it had to breathe. Each day the women would come to check the progress. When the bubbles were at their peak, the ale was ready to drink. It could last for months, even years if it was kept cool enough. But left too long, it would turn hard and sour and become unfit for drinking. So the first rule of brewing, drink before it sours. Water clear does not mean clean. Still, water hides sickness. Many drank it. Many paid the price. Ale as every day. It was not strong, it was not sweet, but it was safe and warm. One day a stranger came to the village. He walked with purpose, head held high, eyes sharp and bright. He carried a goatskin sack over his shoulder and a wooden cup in his hand. He stopped at each house, asking for water to sample. The women of the village, suspicious by nature, refused, for they knew what the traveler knew. Water clear does not mean clean. Still, water hides sickness. He found an old stone well hidden behind a thick hedge and filled his cup. The water was clear, but he did not drink. Instead, he poured some into a small clay pot, placed it on a rock, and set it in the sun. He then took out a small bag from his sack, put some of the grain he'd been given and tied it up. He set it beside the pot and sat down to wait. In the village, the women watched him from behind the hedge. They watched as he ate his bread and drank his wine, but they did not join him. For days, the stranger stayed by the well, eating and drinking, watching the clay pot. Finally, the moment arrived. The liquid in the pot was bubbling and sighing. The stranger smiled, ladled some into his cup and drank. Then he called out to the women, offering them a taste. They hesitated, but the promise of something new overcame their fear. One by one, they approached the well and drank. The first sip was the hardest, but once the liquid warmed their bellies, they felt alive. Water clear does not mean clean. Still, water hides sickness. Many drank it, many paid the price. Ale as every day. It was not strong, it was not sweet, but it was safe and warm. When the stranger was ready to leave, the women gifted him with some of their best grain and a large clay pot. He thanked them and promised to return someday. Soon after, the stranger returned to the village. This time he brought a large vessel filled with a golden liquid. With him were sacks of grain and clay pots for each woman. He taught them how to make the ale last longer, how to keep it safe, and how to make it stronger or weaker. He also gave them special grain that produced a sweeter, stronger ale. For many moons, the villagers thrived. They shared their ale with the stranger. In return, he told them stories of faraway lands and the adventures he'd had. They named the golden ale Mead, after the moon that shone brightest in the night sky. The name stuck, and the people continued to make the drink. It became a rare treat, a special occasion drink, not for every day. And so they continued to brew their everyday ale and save the mead for special gifts. Hello, and welcome to this channel. Today we're going to look at the history of drinking cups. Now that is a broad subject, so we will not be able to cover everything. I will just pick a few interesting facts from each era and see where that takes us. We will begin in medieval Europe. Wine for the few imported, aged, costly. Wine was rank, not for workers, for bishops and kings. You see, wine in the Middle Ages was an expensive luxury good. It was imported into Europe from the Middle East, and it was a very slow process because they had to wait for the winds to be favorable, and then ships would sail across the Mediterranean and up the European rivers to deliver their goods. So that made the wine even more expensive. In addition to that, the wine had to be aged before it was fit for consumption, which took several years. Furthermore, the wine was adulterated with vinegar or other liquids to increase its volume. And this practice created many problems, such as people getting drunk on bad wine and even going blind from it. Children and ale, they drank it too. Small ale, weak and thin. Well, I guess if you can't afford wine, you just drink beer instead. But don't think that beer was a worker's drink. There are records of people going blind from bad beer. I mean, small ale was the most common type of beer, and it was very weak, about half the alcohol content of modern beer. However, there also existed strong beers like sack, which were brewed for special occasions. These were brewed by monks, and very little was known about how they did it, but it was rumored that they used special ingredients from faraway lands. Water was worse. This was normal. Oh yeah. Water wasn't exactly safe to drink either. It often contained animal and human waste, as well as other impurities. People were aware of this, though, and usually boiled it before drinking it. But boiling water didn't make it safer. It just killed off most of the microorganisms. But what it did do was that it made it easier to transport, so travelers often carried boiled water with them, cups of wood and bone, no glass, no crystal, just carved wood or shaped horn. Yes, there was no glass in the Middle Ages, not until the 18th century when glassmaking reached Europe. Before that time, cups were made out of wood or bone. They used the hollowed-out skulls of animals and carved wooden cups. Now those were sturdy. Sometimes the cups were made out of pewter, but that was a luxury. Taverns and talk. Taverns. They weren't just a place to get drunk. They were a place to get news, to discuss politics, to tell stories, and to meet people. So what did people talk about? They discussed everything. Politics, religion, sports, wars, anything you can think of. They talked about everything. Was gossip also part of the menu? Well, of course. What is a tavern without gossip? They also exchanged rumors and urban legends, and sometimes these stories got out of hand and people started believing them. You know, sometimes people said that if you went to the tavern long enough, you would hear all the secrets of the world. Drink brought voices, stories, laughter, fights. A lot of fighting went on in taverns, and not just fist fights, but also fights with knives and swords. It was not uncommon for a fight to break out over a game of dice. And the worst part was that the tavern keeper wasn't allowed to stop the fight. He could only watch and hope that nobody died. And when somebody did die, then he had to pay a fine to the king. The cup was company. The fire, a friend. Did people drink alone in the Middle Ages? Well, sometimes they did. Some people liked to come home after a long day of work and have a nice hot mug of ale by the fire. It was comforting, and it reminded them of the days when they used to sit by their mother's knee and listen to her stories. Some people also drank to raise their spirits. If they were sad, they drank. If they were bored, they drank. And sometimes they just drank because it was the only thing that made life bearable. Drinkers escape. When the day was hard, drink was soft. It dulled the world, if only for a while. It's true. Drinking numbs your senses, and when you're drunk, you don't feel pain or sorrow. You don't feel anything except maybe happiness. At least that's how it seems. But in reality, you're just escaping from your problems. The more you drink, the deeper into the abyss you go. And when you finally hit bottom, then you realize that you have nothing left. But for a moment, you can forget about your problems. For a moment, you can be somebody else. For a moment, you can be free. Water could kill. Ale could comfort. Ale is one of the oldest drinks known to man. It was first brewed in Mesopotamia around 1800 BC, and it has been enjoyed ever since. People drank it for many reasons. Sometimes they drank it because it was the only thing available. Sometimes they drank it because they liked the taste. And sometimes they drank it because they wanted to forget their problems. Whatever the reason, ale is a drink that has been with humanity for thousands of years. But wait, I said that they drank it because it was the only thing available. What about wine? Didn't they drink that too? Of course they did, but wine was a luxury good. Not everyone could afford it. It was expensive and it was imported. Ale, on the other hand, was much cheaper. It was made from barley and water, two things that were readily available in most places. Now I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they just drink water? Well, water wasn't exactly safe to drink. It often contained animal or human waste, as well as other impurities. People knew this and usually boiled it before drinking it. Boiling water didn't make it safer. It just killed off most of the microorganisms. But it did make it easier to transport, so travelers often carried boiled water with them. And what about beer? Well, beer was a bit different. It was made through a process called fermentation, which involved adding yeast to a mixture of barley and water. This created alcohol and carbon dioxide, which gave beer its distinctive taste and made it slightly intoxicating. Because of this, beer was often seen as a more adult beverage. It wasn't something that children could drink. Of course, there were exceptions to every rule. And there were times when people of all ages would drink whatever they could get their hands on. For example, during the Black Death pandemic of the 14th century, people were so desperate for a distraction from their horrible circumstances that they began brewing a type of beer that was literally called desperation. What do you think of the old sayings, water everywhere, not a drop to drink, and when in Rome, do as the Romans do? They both have something to do with water and drinking. Can you figure out what? Well, the first saying, water everywhere, not a drop to drink, refers to a situation where there is an abundance of water, but it is all salty ocean water. This is exactly what happened to the crew of the Mayflower in 1620. They were crossing the Atlantic Ocean and they ran out of fresh water. By the time they landed in North America, they had been without fresh water for weeks. Imagine what that must have been like, to see water all around you, but to know that it is undrinkable. Now, the second saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, has something to do with water and drinking too. It means that when you are in a foreign country, you should follow their customs, otherwise you might offend them. For example, if you go to a country where the people think that it is rude to eat with your hands, then you should probably use utensils. If you go to a country where the people think that it is polite to burp after a meal, then you should probably let them. And if you go to a country where the people think that it is customary to pour wine with two hands, then you should probably do that too. In the Ottoman Empire, there was a custom to pour wine with two hands. This custom came from ancient Rome, and it was a way of showing respect to the guests. The Ottomans were very hospitable people, and they took great pride in entertaining their guests. So it was very important for them to follow all of the proper etiquette rules. That included pouring wine with two hands. So next time you find yourself in a foreign country, remember the saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And if you want to learn more about wine, then be sure to check out our previous videos. We think we know what a hot dog tastes like, how a pizza should be seasoned, or which country makes the best chocolate. But if this is true, then why do people still argue about it? Because food is not just about taste, it's about experience. And our story starts in a time when getting an exquisite meal was a true adventure. There was a place where plates were bare, the food was bland, until spice arrived from lands never seen, across oceans and sands, black as pitch, small as ants, sharp as stings. These were no ordinary berries, they were pepper, and they came with a price. You see, before the age of supermarkets and shipping containers, spices were rare and valuable commodities, often taking years to arrive and crossing continents by foot, by pack animal, or by sea. So imagine the cost. Oh, and that's exactly what we did for this episode. We found the real prices. Of all the things we'll talk about today, none will shock you more than these numbers because they're higher than you think, much higher. Before we begin, a quick warning. This dish is extra spicy. Watch at your own risk. Today, we'll travel back to a time when spices could make you rich or poor, save your life or end it. When a single pouch of pepper could buy a cow. This is the unbelievable story of the most expensive spices in history. Black, small, sharp. That's how people described pepper, and those who sold it well became very wealthy. In fact, there was a saying, "He who buys pepper for gold shall be esteemed a fool." It wasn't until 1498 that Vasco da Gama reached India by sea and realized he could get this wonder for much less. Then the trade began. Europe was in. European merchants soon competed with Indian ones, and the price started dropping. But even so, it was still really expensive. In the Middle Ages, a pound of pepper could cost you 1 year's rent in London, or 6 sheep, 2 oxen, and a barrel of wine. At least pepper was worth the money. Unlike some other spices, its flavor didn't fade away after a while. But this wasn't true for cinnamon. Cinnamon, clove, and power. Their names were whispered in taverns. Their scent meant power, only the rich could afford them. When the wind blew across the sand, carrying with it the smell of clove, everyone knew someone important was around. If a king came to town, he would have cinnamon sticks in his hand. Only the king could use such luxury. And don't forget about cloves. One whiff was enough to let everyone know that the person wearing them had status. But how did they get their hands on these precious spices? Well, to reach the places they grew up, you needed guides, and those guides demanded payment in gold. If you thought pepper was expensive, try this. A pound of cinnamon cost around 32 pounds of gold. That's $100,000. And as for cloves, they were even pricier, $250,000 per pound. But where did these spices come from? The answer is ancient lands, 4,000 kilometers away from Europe. The problem was getting there, even worse, returning alive. That's why they were called the spice roads, dangerous routes to faraway lands. Sometimes they lasted for months. Sometimes they went nowhere because of bandits. Sometimes they got you killed because of disease. Sometimes the boat sank. What you paid for the trip depending on your status. But the final price was always high. We couldn't find exact prices for these trips because they were never the same. They changed depending on the season, the ship, the guide. But what we found was even worse because even when the roads became safer and faster, the price didn't go down much. In 1597, a ship left for the East Indies and returned 3 times its investment. 3 times. It may sound like a good deal until you realize they made almost no profit. They lost money on maintenance, repairs, supplies, crew wages, pirates' taxes, fights with other Europeans. What does this mean? To break even, the ship would need to earn 4 times as much. In other words, for every $100 invested, they would only make 25. That's why some explorers went rogue. They didn't want to go around, they wanted to go straight. They were looking for a shortcut. When they found it, the prices dropped dramatically. For example, before the discovery of the Americas, the markets in Spain and Portugal were almost empty of spices. Once they found out they could sail directly to Asia, the market was flooded. The result, prices crashed. But why are we talking about the past? Because even today, some spices are priceless. This is saffron, Crocus sativus. It grows in places with mild climates, but only if they're at a certain altitude and there's a lot of sunshine. The plant needs to absorb the UV rays, and the soil must have a low amount of nitrogen. If any of this is wrong, the plant won't open, and there will be no saffron. Luckily, there's a scientific way to produce it, but do you know how hard it is to make a kilo? Here's how it goes. Pick the flowers early in the morning, separate the stigmas by hand, dry them in the shade, and keep checking them to prevent mold. Repeat this until you have enough stigmas to make saffron. If you're wondering how much this costs, here's your answer: $6,000 per kilo. There are cheaper ones, of course, but their quality is not the same. Saffron is unique, but vanilla is something else. Imagine a world without ice cream, cookies, candies. Vanilla makes 75% of the world's population happy. Maybe you're one of them. But do you know where it comes from? Madagascar. This island produces 200,000 tons of vanilla a year. That sounds like a lot, right? Well, actually, it's not, because over half the world's supply comes from a single place: Indonesia. This makes Madagascar's production unstable, leading to crazy prices. And don't forget about cyclones, pests, and weeds. You can forget about perfect crops. You can forget about lower prices. The result: 1 kilogram of top-quality vanilla costs $6,200. These spices are special, but some are used to cure diseases. Ginger, turmeric, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, cardamom, coriander, black pepper. All these have been used as medicine. And guess what? Science now proves that they work. But even today, some are really expensive. Like saffron, many believe it cures depression, but there's no evidence to support it. On the other hand, ginger has been proven to reduce nausea. Turmeric is great against Alzheimer's. Cinnamon helps fight diabetes. Cardamom strengthens the body. Coriander is excellent against migraines. And nutmeg improves blood circulation. You see, there's no placebo effect here. Now tell me which of these you would pay for. If you said all of them, then you're like the Chinese. They used all of them for centuries. They combined them in different ways to treat many diseases. They created remedies, tonics, pills, syrups, oils, wines, and beers. They even believed that spices could cure fevers, stop bleeding, and help the sick live longer. Some of these ideas were true, others not so much. But to this day, spices are used as medicine. Today, many people use spices to treat bad breath, infections, heartburn, toothaches, headaches, nausea, joint pain. But are they effective? Well, there's no proof that they work better than traditional medicine, but many say that they do. So which ones are the best? Cardamom, cumin, cinnamon, thyme, oregano, lavender, sage, ginger, pepper, bay leaves, star anise, mint, lemon balm, garlic. They've all been used as natural antibiotics. Some spices were even considered a miracle. Star anise, for example. People drank it to feel high. Saffron was considered a painkiller. Cinnamon was used to cure malaria. Ginger was a remedy against anxiety. Nutmeg eased toothaches. Turmeric fought cancer. Vanilla reduced fever, and cloves stopped bleeding. Sounds too good to be true. And it kind of is, because many of these claims are based on beliefs, not science. But others might actually be true. For example, we now know that turmeric helps against Alzheimer's, while ginger relieves nausea after surgery. Still, some cures weren't that accurate. For example, people believed that mixing mustard seeds and salt cured cough. They were wrong, but in the past they were trying. Today, we have modern medicine. Back then, they had spices. The journey of spices began thousands of years ago, and it's still going. And although they're still expensive, many of them have become everyday staples. Today, we take them for granted. We don't appreciate their origins, their journey, or their value. The next time you cook, think about it. The next time you eat, remember the journey of spices. The next time you taste a bite, imagine the lands they came from. Did you learn anything new? Tell us in the comments, check out our other videos, subscribe, and don't forget to give us a thumbs up. See you next time. Salt was survival, spice was status. One kept you alive, the other made you noble. The kitchen knew the difference. Cooks knew who paid. Spice meant silence. No one wasted a pinch. False spices and fraud saw dust. Burnt herbs, a fake spice for a real coin. A scent that shamed to smell of spice was to belong. To smell of stew was to survive. In the year 1346, the Black Death raged across Europe. Town after town fell victim to the plague. Entire families perished, leaving behind only the dead and the dying. By the time it reached England, authorities had already begun to try and contain its spread. On April 27th, the English Parliament passed the Orders of Confinement, a set of regulations intended to slow the spread of the sickness by limiting movement and encouraging good hygiene. Those who became ill were ordered to remain inside their homes, while those deemed healthy were forbidden from entering infected households. All gatherings were banned, as were pilgrimages to holy sites. Theatres, bowling alleys and brothels were shut down, and taverns were prohibited from serving food. Today, we remember the victims of the plague with a moment of silence. But in the late Middle Ages, people's reactions to the pandemic were a lot more complicated, and nowhere was that more evident than in the kitchen. As the plague reached England in 1348, London officials began to worry about how the disease was being spread. And they quickly put the blame on foreigners. The sick were coming into the city via boats from abroad, it seemed, and so anything imported was declared suspect. The result was a series of increasingly extreme edicts aimed at stemming the flow of contaminated goods. Starting in July 1348, London prohibited the import of wine from France, Flanders and Spain, as well as vinegar from France and Spain. The import of fish from France was banned in August. Then, in September, all imports from France and Spain were banned completely. Soon, merchants who had already purchased French or Spanish goods found themselves in possession of contraband. With panic rising and disease spreading, citizens took matters into their own hands, attacking warehouses and seizing any suspect goods they could find. Within days, entire streets were in flames. Looters ran through the burning city, carrying off sacks of grain, barrels of wine and bales of cloth. Homes were ransacked and shops were emptied. In the end, between $40,000 and $60,000 worth of property was destroyed. That's over $10 million in today's money, and no one even bothered to count the cost of the lives lost. The plague would eventually kill an estimated 25 million Europeans, nearly half of the continent's population. But as history tells us, pandemics have always had an economic as well as a biological impact. And no sector felt the effects more acutely than the spice trade. For centuries, spices had been synonymous with luxury and wealth. The most expensive of these were the Asian spices like cinnamon, cloves and nutmeg, which grew only on a single Indonesian island called Banda. Demand for these spices was so high in Europe that merchants in Venice and Genoa established trading posts on the island, effectively creating the world's first multinational corporation. But with trade routes disrupted and merchants reluctant to risk infection, prices spiked. In fact, the price of saffron would double within a decade of the plague's arrival. In the meantime, cooks were faced with a shortage of supplies and the dangerous task of feeding hungry customers. Throughout the Middle Ages, cooks were considered social outcasts. They were too dirty to eat with nobles, but too close to the royal table to dine with commoners. This left cooks in a sort of culinary no-man's land, where they were expected to prepare the finest dishes in the kingdom, but never get to enjoy them. As a result, cooks became some of the biggest gossips in the castle, privy to every secret whispered across the dinner table. If they weren't careful, this could make them very powerful people. In 1319, when the steward of King Edward III's household stole the king's jewels, he tried to hide them in pastry dough and smuggle them out of the castle disguised as a pie. Unfortunately, his plan was ruined by the cook, who reported him to the head baker and ended his career as a royal chef. But if cooks wanted to keep secrets, they needed to be extremely careful. After all, not everyone was willing to listen to gossip. And in 1327, one cook learned that the hard way. His name was William of Langley, and he worked in the kitchen of Queen Isabella of France. During her son's reign, Queen Isabella had used her position to build up a coterie of advisors, confidants, and mistresses. She also amassed a vast fortune, having acquired the manor of North Mims as part of her marriage agreement with Edward II. But her son, Edward III, was eager to assert his dominance over the kingdom, and he began to feel threatened by his mother's growing power. On September 23, 1326, Edward III marched on North Mims with an armed force and seized both his mother and her lover. He then imprisoned them in separate towers, where they died shortly after. While the Queen died of natural causes, her lover met a far more gruesome fate. He was stripped naked, tied up and drowned in a bath. And when word of the incident reached William, he couldn't help but gloat. Naturally, he bragged about what he'd heard to anyone who would listen, including Hugh Despenser, the former Earl of Winchester and father of Edward III's mistress. When Despenser's son returned from exile and overheard William boasting, he immediately took offense. According to the records, William denied having said anything, but under torture, he confessed to the crime. And on March 1327, he was executed in front of the North Mims Manor. The records don't specify how he died, but it seems likely that he suffered the same fate as the Queen's lover. From then on, cooks throughout England knew better than to trust their ears or their tongues. With demand high and supply low, cooks had to do more with less, often turning simple ingredients into complex dishes. Medieval cooks were true culinary alchemists, transforming humble ingredients into delicacies fit for a king. Take, for example, the humble turnip. These root vegetables are still served today, but during the Middle Ages, they were considered a luxury good. When properly prepared, however, turnips could become a dish fit for royalty. First, the turnips would be peeled, chopped, and boiled until tender. They were then placed in a special mold, designed to make them look like a wheel of cheese. Once they cooled, the wheels were cut into quarters, and each quarter was sprinkled with salt, pepper, ginger, and saffron. The finished product looked like a giant cheese wheel, complete with wedges cut out of it. But it wasn't just the appearance that impressed diners. Turnips were naturally sweet and lent themselves to spicy flavors. Medieval cooks maximized this natural sweetness by combining the roots with apples and pears, often adding spices like cinnamon, cloves, and ginger. These combinations of flavors may sound strange to us today, but medieval cooks experimented with different flavor profiles and textures to stretch their ingredients as far as possible. Their goal was to produce the most complex and interesting flavors from the simplest and most basic ingredients. They did this by using every part of every ingredient and by developing new cooking techniques that allowed them to add texture and flavor to otherwise bland dishes. For example, medieval cooks would often use the bones and scraps left over from butchering to make a broth or stock. They also developed new ways of cooking meat, such as braising and stewing, which allowed them to keep meat wall-to-wall medium. Rare, these methods required lower temperatures and longer cooking times, but the results were worth it. Meat cooked slowly in its own juices became incredibly tender and succulent. This approach to cooking meant that medieval cooks were able to make the most of their ingredients and produce dishes that were both satisfying and complex. They were true masters of their craft, and their skills were essential to the royal court. But not all cooks were working in the kitchens of the rich and powerful. In fact, many were employed by ordinary folk who had far more modest needs. For them, cooking was a matter of survival rather than luxury. When it came to feeding the masses, there was no room for fancy sauces or exotic spices. Instead, cooks had to rely on their ingenuity to stretch their ingredients and feed as many people as possible. Medieval cooks were incredibly resourceful, and they were able to come up with all sorts of creative ways to use whatever ingredients they had on hand. They also developed new cooking techniques that allowed them to make the most of their ingredients and feed as many people as possible. For example, Medieval cooks often used leftovers in new and innovative ways. They would take stale bread, for example, and make breadcrumbs, which could then be used as a thickener for soups and sauces. They would also use leftover meat and poultry by chopping it up and adding it to stews or puddings. These practices not only helped to stretch their ingredients, but they also added a lot of flavor to the dishes. In addition to using leftovers in creative ways, medieval cooks also developed new cooking techniques that allowed them to feed more people with less ingredients. For example, they developed new methods for preserving food, such as pickling and smoking, which allowed them to keep food fresh for longer periods of time. They also developed new ways of cooking meat, such as braising and stewing, which allowed them to keep meat wall-to-wall medium rare. But despite their best efforts, not every dish was destined to be a masterpiece. Sometimes things went horribly wrong in the kitchen and the results were downright deadly. A single grain of spice could speak louder than gold. But in the kitchens of the poor, no such scent lingered. There, danger came not from excess, but from rot. Let us now enter those kitchens and what crawled beneath them. Thanks for watching. The year is 1895. You are about to enter a kitchen unlike any other you have ever seen. It is not just dirty, it is uniquely filthy. It is the pinnacle of filth. This is the most disgusting kitchen in the world. For starters, it's made of stone. There is a thick layer of grease covering every inch of the wall, like the fattiest part of your body. The ceiling has not been white for years, if it ever was. The smell of yesterday's meals lingers in the air, mixing with the stench of the meat about to be cooked. Rats run across the floor, leap onto the counters, jump into the pantry and disappear into the walls. They live among the jars, making their homes behind the shelves. You have seen rats before, everyone has, but these are not like those rats. These rats are everywhere. They're in the nooks, they're in the crannies, they're in the walls, they're in the beams. Everyone knows they're here. No one wants them here, but no one does anything about them. You look down at the floor, it is caked with dirt. Your shoes stick to it. You look up at the cabinets. Do they even clean those? Do they even try? You glance at the windows. A thin sliver of light peeks through the grimy glass, barely illuminating the room. Everything in this kitchen smells bad. The floors, the chairs, the tables, the walls, the cabinets, the people, the animals, everything stinks. In the corner of the room, there is a bucket filled with water. A few carrots and potatoes float in the murky liquid, along with something else that doesn't belong, something that shouldn't be there, something that makes you feel sick to your stomach. You can't bring yourself to look any longer. You turn away and make your way toward the counter. You see a woman-rum family standing there, chopping vegetables. She cuts onions, tomatoes, carrots, potatoes, whatever she needs for today's soup or stew or maybe tomorrow's, because no one knows where food will come from next. No one knows how long it will last. No one knows when hunger will strike again, so you prepare for when it does. She's cutting everything on the same board. Raw chicken sits next to chopped lettuce. Her knife touches a carrot, then an onion, then the raw chicken. She washes nothing. She cannot wash. There is no water in this kitchen except for the bucket in the corner. There is no soap. She doesn't need them anyway. No one does. There's a special sauce that keeps the sickness at bay. A sauce made of vinegar and spices and good old elbow grease. At least that's what everyone tells themselves. There is no running water in this kitchen, no plumbing, no sink. There is only the bucket in the corner. That is for washing clothes, washing dishes, cleaning hands, cleaning bodies. Sometimes there isn't even enough water for that. How do people eat in this kitchen? How do they prepare the food? How do they cook the meals? They use the same hands that touch everything else, the same hands that don't wash, the same hands that reach into the buckets and pull out the floating vegetables and put them into the pot. This is a place where flies land on the food, where hands reach in and grab whatever they can, where fingers dip into bowls and lick them clean. There are no plates in this kitchen, only bowls and platters. A small bowl sits on the counter. The woman rum family takes it and begins ladling soup into it. The ladle touches the rim of the bowl. Then it goes into the pot and comes back out with the soup. Nothing is clean in this kitchen, but the soup tastes good. Maybe too good. You stare at the bowl as the woman rum family eats it. You watch her slurp the last drops of soup, then wipe her mouth with the sleeve of her dress. She finishes the bowl and puts it down. In the corner, there is a cat that looks like it hasn't bathed in months. It creeps closer to the bowl. When it sees the remaining soup, it begins lapping it up, lapping up the last bits of flavor and nutrition. When it is done, it looks up at the woman rum family and meows loudly. She ignores it. The cat looks around the kitchen. It jumps up on a chair, jumps down, walks over to the bucket and takes a drink. Who cooks the food in this kitchen? Who prepares the meals? Who cleans? Mostly women, mostly wives, mostly mothers. Sometimes daughters help out too when they're old enough. They watch their mothers, learn by doing, lend a hand, take on the responsibility, become the next generation of cooks. The man of the house hunts for food. He brings home what he can find. If he finds nothing, they go hungry. That is what happens when you live in a world without refrigeration, a world without preservatives, a world without supermarkets. You sit at the table. A woman rum family sits across from you. She doesn't know you, but she welcomes you to eat with her family. She passes you a wooden spoon. You stir the pot. The stew bubbles. It smells delicious. You dig in with the spoon. You eat the stew. It tastes wonderful. As you eat, you listen to the woman rum family talk. She talks about the rats, how big they are, how many there are, how much they stink. She says they've always been here, as long as she can remember. The walls were like this when she was a girl, the floor sticky when she was little. She remembers chasing rats with her brother, how he would laugh and scream as they ran through the house, the rats darting between their legs. Back then, there were more children. Life was harder, but things were different. They didn't know any better. She thinks back to when her mother died, how her father remarried and brought home his new wife, how she had hated her at first, how she had resented her new mother for taking her mother's place. She remembers the day her little sister was born, how she had wished for another mouth to feed, another set of hands to help, another soul to love. She wonders where her brother is now, if he remembers her, if he thinks of this house sometimes. She stirs the pot and watches the stew bubble. She wonders what tomorrow will bring, if there will be food, if there will be company, if the rats will keep coming. She wonders how much longer she will live in this house, in this world, in this life. She wonders if anyone will remember her, if anyone cares. You finish your meal and push the bowl away. You look around the room at the greasy walls, the sticky floors, the rat-infested pantry, the dirty windows, the lifeless chairs, the heavy table. You wonder if anyone has ever loved this kitchen, if anyone has ever found beauty in its filth, if anyone has ever felt at home here. You stand up and walk toward the door. The woman rum family watches you. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. You already know the question she is asking. Are you going to stay? Are you going to help? Are you going to clean? Are you going to kill the rats? She already knows the answers. You are not staying. You are not helping. You are not cleaning. You are not killing the rats. You step outside, closing the door behind you. As you walk away, you hear the sounds of the kitchen, the pots and pans banging, the woman rum family swearing, the rats scurrying, the flies buzzing, the cat meowing. You keep walking. You don't look back. You don't want to. You never will. You are leaving the most disgusting kitchen in the world behind you. If you enjoyed this video, check out the series. Thanks for watching. There were flies and there were fingers. Flies landed on the fingers. Hands touched. No one washed, no one could. Mold was normal. Bread turned green. Cheese turned blue. Some scraped it off. Some ate it anyway. Boiling as hope. If you boiled it, it might be safe. If not, you prayed. Smell as a warning. If it stank, don't eat it. Unless you must. Sickness in silence. Stomach pain, sweat, fever. No one blamed the food, they blamed the wind. Danger in every bite. Food gave life, food gave death, and no one could tell which one it would be. The kitchen fed, the kitchen killed. Still they ate because they had to. This is the story of plague and plenty, of pestilence and feast. It is the story of a kitchen that played God with the lives of men. This kitchen was not always this way. It hadn't always been a place of sickness and death. In another time, it had been a place of warmth and life. Its hearth had been a place of gathering, its table a place of sharing, its chairs a place of rest. This is how it looked then, full of light and laughter, full of hope and hearth. Then came the plague. At first the illness stalked the streets, claiming the old and the weak. Then it entered homes, claiming the young and the strong. It spared no one. Those who survived shut their doors against the dead, or those who were dying, hoping that the walls could keep out the plague. For a while the walls did their job. The sick did not enter, the healthy did not leave. But what kept them alive began to kill them. Slowly, surely, the plague entered the home through the food on the table. The food they ate, the water they drank, it all became a hazard. Nothing was safe anymore. Even the salt that seasoned their food was tainted. The very air inside the house was thick with the smell of death. Hope fled the home. Fear took its place. They were afraid of everything, even hunger. Outside, the plague raged. Inside, fear festered. One day, someone got up from the table and went to the window. He saw the sun glint off a knife left on the table. With the last of his strength, he picked up the cloth and wiped the table clean. His hand shook so much that the cloth fell back on the table. He tried again and again to wipe the table clean. To his horror, his hand kept leaving marks on the cloth. Blood. Was the table cursed? Was the food cursed? What was happening to him? He did not know. He was too weak to care. He fell back into the chair, closed his eyes, and died. Outside, the plague continued its march. Inside, death stayed for dinner. It stayed for breakfast, lunch, and supper. It stayed for snacks and supper. The kitchen was no longer a place of life. It was a place of death. Yet sometimes life dared to peek through the cracks. Sometimes the food was blessed instead of cursed. Sometimes a meal brought life instead of death. Who could tell? No one entered the kitchen without fear. Only the brave or the desperate entered the kitchen. Those who cooked there wore masks and gloves, but even then, sometimes the hands trembled, sometimes the hands slipped. Who could say if the next meal would be a death sentence or a lifesaver? So the kitchen continued to play God, deciding who lived and who died. Occasionally, a face would appear at the window, looking in, wondering if the plague had lifted. Occasionally, a door would open and a tentative step would sound. Occasionally, a child would hum outside, unaware of the graveyard inside. And all the time, the kitchen waited. It waited to feed, to nurture, to heal, to kill, to curse, to bless. It waited to decide the fate of men. It waited patiently for the next guest. Sometimes a visitor would come bearing news of villages where the plague had passed, where the sun shone again. Sometimes visitors would arrive bearing gifts, herbs and spices and flour and meat, food to drive away the plague. Sometimes the visitors were just curious. They wanted to see for themselves, to peer into the mouth of death, to look into the cauldron of the plague. Every time the door opened, the kitchen held its breath. Every time a visitor arrived, the kitchen held out a dish. Would it be the dish of life or the dish of death? You decide. Fear at the table. The knife cuts meat. The hand hesitates. Even kings were afraid of what they swallowed. Kings and queens, they ruled over their subjects with an iron fist and an iron stomach. For those who wielded power, there was always the threat of demise lurking around the corner, waiting for a chance to strike. No one could sit at the king's table without fear. The food looked appetizing, but was it safe to eat? The preparation had been done by servants whose loyalty was questionable, and who knew who among them was eager to end the monarch's life and take the throne for themselves. Sometimes even kings and queens were hesitant to eat. It seemed like common sense to suspect that someone might want them dead, but it never crossed the minds of most nobles to think that the same might happen to them. However, this was not always the case. Some people were so feared and respected that no one would dare lay a finger on them. Find out more below. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe for more amazing stories. Poisoner's tools. For many, poisoning was the perfect murder weapon. It left no trace and had no witnesses. It also offered a lot of opportunities for a skilled poisoner. There was powder. This type of poison was very popular during the Middle Ages because it was cheap and easy to get. A skilled poisoner could easily slip some into a drink or food. Sometimes poison was mixed into wine, which is why kings often preferred to have their drink served through a straw. The straw allowed the king to sip the drink without dipping the entire vessel into his mouth. Plant. Nature offered many poisonous plants, but the most popular ones were henbane, nightshade, deadly nightshade, and foxglove. Poisoners used these plants to brew teas and tinctures that could kill a person or keep them in a perpetual slumber. Resin. Not everyone liked the taste of plant-based poisons. Fortunately, nature offered another option. Deadly nightshade resin was tasteless and odorless. This made it perfect for mixing into foods and drinks. Sometimes it was mixed into sauces where it stayed undetected until it was too late. Disguised as medicine. If you were sick, you wanted to get rid of the illness as soon as possible. So when your royal doctor offered you a remedy, you didn't ask questions. You just took the medicine. Little did you know it was a concoction of deadly nightshade, foxglove, and opium mixed together. Your royal doctor was actually a paid assassin sent by your rivals to take your life. But you wouldn't be alone. Throughout history, there were instances where an entire royal family was wiped out by a single poisoner. Imagine waking up in the morning and every member of your family being dead. That's what happened to King Henry VIII's nephew, the Duke of Northumberland, his wife and their 8 children after drinking poisoned wine. Silver against the threat. Some people believed that silver could protect them from harm. In medieval times, it was believed that if a person was poisoned, their silver eating utensils would turn black. This belief led to the use of silver spoons and plates in many royal courts as a way to detect poison. The theory behind the idea was that silver was a pure metal and would react negatively when in contact with poison. It sounds plausible, but there's no scientific evidence to support the claim. Still, it was widely believed back then, and even today, there are plenty of people who swear by it. But if the idea had any truth to it, why did the supposed antidotal silver fail so often? Throughout history, there have been countless cases of people being poisoned despite using silver cutlery. Perhaps the theory held some truth, but the reactions were so minute that they went unnoticed. Then again, maybe it was all just a fairy tale. Food tasters. In many kingdoms, there was a tradition of having a food taster who would try the food before the king or queen ate. These tasters were usually volunteers, meaning they were typically people who owed the monarch a debt of gratitude and hoped that their service would go unnoticed. Other times, though, they were eunuchs who had been taken from Africa or Asia. Whatever their background, their job was simple: try the food and die if it was poisoned. Being a food taster was an honor and a dangerous job. If the food was poisoned, the taster would take the blame and save the monarch's life. But they would also die in the process. Some tasters were lucky enough to live long lives because they served multiple monarchs. One of the most famous food tasters in history was Venetian Bartolomeo Vegan, who served 4 popes and outlived 3 of them. A life for a king. Being a food taster wasn't the only way to test the food. Sometimes the king's servant would eat first and wait for a sign from his master. If the king didn't show any signs of illness or death, then the coast was clear. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the last to find out. The danger of eating the king's food can't be overstated. If a servant accidentally survived eating the poisoned meal, they would be killed anyway to prevent word of the plot getting out. Sometimes a king would choose someone close to him to be sacrificed in place of tasting the food. This person would willingly eat the food, and if they died, the king would know the food was poisoned. Suspicion in every bite. Of course, there were other ways to tell if the food was safe. Experienced chefs knew exactly what each dish should look, smell, and taste like. They could easily spot any abnormalities that might mean the food was unsafe to eat. Too much flavor, too little, a strange smell, a second thought. What if it wasn't the chef who tampered with the food? What if it was the baker who put poison in the bread instead of salt? Suspicion covered every area of the king's life. Those who prepared his food weren't the only ones under scrutiny. Everyone who came into contact with the king's food was watched closely. Serving the wrong dish or bringing a dish that wasn't fully prepared could mean severe punishment. Imagine getting demoted to the rank of a peasant for serving a slightly burnt chicken leg to the king. All jokes aside, such things did happen. Most cooks and servers had no ill will against their royal employer. However, once a cook at King Edward VI's court had to be investigated for replacing sugar with plaster in the Queen's pastry. And don't forget about caterers. They were also subject to suspicion. Once, a catering lady was accused of trying to poison the Duchess of York. Her motive: the Duchess had criticized her pudding. To avoid any unfortunate incidents, people often had to come up with alibis. Cooks and servers claimed that they got their recipes from their mothers, while caterers said that their families had served royal courts for generations and they would never do anything to disgrace their ancestors. But even these excuses didn't always work. Which method of detecting poison would you choose? If you had to eat the same food as the king, would you rather risk it all and eat it like him, trust the silver cutlery, or have someone else test the food first? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button and share it with a friend. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more amazing videos. Is it possible for food to be too good? Suspicion in every bite? Too much flavor, too little? Is there a strange smell? Was that a second thought you had just then? Did you think this dish was poisoned? You may not trust the cook. You may never have heard of the blue beard. You may think yourself immune to such base suspicions. But women and whispered recipes are potent things. Old herbs, old wives, some healed, some harmed. There's something in the very air we eat with. Something unspoken, yet all-knowing. Did you meet the cook's gaze? Did you avert your eyes first? Did you serve the meal or did someone else? What would you do if you found a dead fly in your soup? Your fork has touched it, so does that mean it's your fault? Do you trust the baker whose bread has been the death of kings? A bite as a weapon, not a blade, not a fire, just dinner. That killed a king. But how can a bite be a weapon? All food is fuel. We must consume to live. To eat was to risk. To feed was to hold power. Most meals were not schemes, they were routine, repetition, ritual. Let us now observe the meal itself, not what, but how. How does one eat with suspicion? How does one swallow accusations whole? How do fingers curl around a cup that may be poisoned? Does one linger over the last bite? Does one push away the plate? Does one watch the other eat? One waits for the other to speak. One watches the hand that reaches for the bread. Is that hand steady? Does it tremble like an accusation? Do you remember the first bite? First bites are dangerous, the flavors are new, the appetite is keen. Do you remember the taste of that first bite? Would you recognize it again? It's gone now, vanished like smoke, like secrets, only ashes in the mouth. The bread was touched. The cup lingered. Some say he wanted her dead, and now she is. The dish is done. The table is cleared, only the smell remains. A whisper in the kitchen, a rumor in the hall, fingers pointed, voices low. You could hear it, couldn't you? Didn't you feel it too, the sudden chill? Did you glance at the door? Did you bury your face in your hands? Did you rush out into the night, justice by bread, trial by swallowing, eat and see? If you choke, you lied. They laid their case before him, a mountain of bread. Crusty loaves, yeasty cakes, wafers blessed by the church, biscuits baked in blood, hot and fresh from the oven. And in the midst of them a single white roll, pure and untouched. This was his test, his judgment. This was his vindication. He took the white roll, broke it into pieces, and ate. He chewed slowly, savoring the taste, the texture, the silence. Then he swallowed. The accused looked on, hope and fear in their eyes. He rose from his seat, walked among them, his gaze steady. And when he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. They brought me bread of many kinds, he said, from the finest flour to the humblest grain, but they were all alike in their purity. None of them had guile or deceit. And so I say that those who brought me this bread are innocent. Let the feast begin. Did he really believe that? Did he know that they were innocent? Or was it all an act? What did he want? What do you want? Have you ever wondered how people eat in medieval times? Are there any rules to be followed? What should you not do? Who sits where and how? To answer all these questions, here are 10 things you should know about medieval table manners. Number 1, who sits where rank decides place. When it comes to medieval dining etiquette, seating arrangements were not a matter of choice, but strictly followed a hierarchy. The most important person always sat at the head of the table with the most prestigious seat known as the high place. Usually this seat was reserved for the king or the host of the banquet. Below the high place was the place of honor. It was located on the right side of the head of the table and was given to the person who was closest to the heart of the monarch or the host. For example, if the king's wife was present, she would naturally take the place of honor at his right hand. Other nobles and important guests were seated at the places of honor on the left side of the head of the table and below the place of the chief. Those with lower social status sat on the left side of the chief's place. The order of precedence among nobles followed the order of their rank. The eldest members of the kingdom came first, then those of lower birth were seated behind them. During a royal feast, the king's advisors and council members often occupied seats around the high table, ensuring that they were close to their sovereign. This placement allowed for easy access to the king, enabling them to deliver messages or seek his counsel. Meanwhile, knights and squires typically took their places at a lower table, situated behind the main high table. If a woman of noble birth attended the feast, she would likely be seated beside her husband or a close male relative. However, it was common for women of noble birth to host their own feasts with their female attendants present. In such cases, they would sit at the head of their own tables with their ladies in waiting position nearby. Members of the clergy also had a designated place within the hierarchy. They usually sat at a separate table, although their exact seating position could vary depending on the occasion. Sometimes they joined the other nobles at the main table, while on other occasions they were seated at a lower table towards the end of the hall. Serving members of the clergy at the high table was considered an honor for the lower servants. Their position at the lowest seats ensured they were away from the power dynamics of the higher tables, allowing them to observe the interactions among the elite. Peasants and farm laborers were generally not invited to share meals with nobility. Instead, they were expected to return to their villages after their workday and dine with their families. Their meals consisted of simple fare, a far cry from the lavish feasts enjoyed by the nobility. Number 2, you do not choose. In medieval times, you didn't get to choose your seat. The position you occupied at the table was dictated by your social standing and predetermined. You were expected to accept and respect the place that was assigned to you without complaint. Number 3, near the Lord, honor and eyes on you. Sitting close to the person with the highest authority, like the king or the lord of the manor, was considered an honor. It signified that the monarch or lord had chosen to be in your company, bestowing upon you a sense of importance and recognition. Being close to the king or lord also provided an opportunity for those around him to gain his attention more easily. It was easier to make requests or have private conversations with him when compared to those seated further away. Moreover, being in the monarch's or lord's line of sight meant that you were being watched, which served as a reminder to behave appropriately and maintain decorum at the table. Number 4, the hand you use. Right hand for eating. The right hand rule is a customary practice observed during medieval times that dictates the usage of the right hand for eating and drinking. This rule extended to other daily activities such as combing one's hair. Using the left hand for eating or drinking was considered impolite and unclean during medieval times. It was believed that the left hand was less clean because it was typically used for personal hygiene tasks, such as cleaning oneself after using the privy. Consequently, using the left hand for eating could contaminate the food and be viewed as disgusting. The origin of this practice can be traced back to religious beliefs. In Christianity, the left hand was associated with uncleanliness due to its use in washing and, more importantly, its association with the devil. Medieval society, deeply influenced by religious norms, carried this belief into everyday practices, including table manners. Number 5, not custom. Custom demanded that when someone entered a medieval dining hall, they had to announce their arrival with a summons. This announcement was usually made by a servant stationed at the entrance who would call out to the person about to enter, giving them a title instead of their name. The person entering would then respond with an equally formal acknowledgement. This custom aimed to create a sense of anticipation and ceremony as someone entered the hall. It was a way to acknowledge their presence before they appeared and allowed the assembled company to prepare themselves mentally for their entrance. This announcement served multiple purposes. First, it helped to emphasize the hierarchical nature of medieval society, where titles and ranks held significant importance. By addressing someone with their appropriate title, it showed respect and acknowledged their status. Second, this practice was a means of controlling noise and maintaining order in the Great Hall. By calling out to the person entering, the assembled company was alerted, and any ongoing conversations or activities could be temporarily paused, ensuring that the newcomer received the attention they deserved. Number 6, command. During medieval times, commanding something at the dinner table was a direct order, and everyone had to obey. If the king or the host commanded someone to perform an action, it was mandatory and no one could refuse. For instance, if the king wanted a particular dish served again, the servants had to ensure it was brought back without delay. Similarly, if the host requested that a guest say a prayer before the meal, they had to comply without hesitation. Number 7, bowls before words. The meal began before anyone spoke. When the food was served, silence was expected to be maintained until the head of the table gave permission to start eating. This custom aimed to create a sense of order and decorum at the beginning of the meal. It was a way to show respect and acknowledge the significance of the shared meal. Furthermore, the pause allowed everyone to gather their thoughts and appreciate the abundance of food before them, fostering a sense of gratitude and mindfulness. It also prevented the potentially embarrassing situation of people beginning to eat at different times or in an uncoordinated manner. Number 8, not yet, not without permission. During medieval times, engaging in conversation before the head of the table gave permission to speak was considered rude and disrespectful. The head of the table, usually the king or the host, had the authority to set the atmosphere and dictate the course of the conversation. Starting a conversation without permission could be seen as a challenge to their authority and could lead to disapproval. Additionally, Engaging in idle chatter before the meal was seen as inappropriate, as it distracted from the solemnity of the shared experience. It was believed that eating in silence before the blessing or the words of grace were spoken was a way to show reverence and gratitude for the food and the company. Number 9. Washing together. A basin was passed. Around during medieval times, a basin would be passed along the table containing water and sometimes scented oils for the purpose of hand washing. After dipping their fingers in the basin, the diners would dry their hands using a towel that was also passed around. This custom served multiple purposes. From a hygienic standpoint, it allowed people to clean their hands before and after the meal, promoting basic sanitation. Additionally, this communal practice was a way to reinforce social bonds and create a sense of unity among the diners. It also showcased the wealth and hospitality of the host, as providing a basin and towels for hand washing was a sign of luxury and refinement. Number 10. No forks, just fingers. Medieval people primarily used their fingers to eat, especially when it came to dishes like roasted meats and vegetables. Forks were not commonly used, and knives were mainly employed for cutting and serving. This custom had practical origins. It was simply more convenient and efficient to use one's fingers to pick up and eat certain foods, particularly in a communal setting. For example, at a large feast, passing around a knife for each person to cut their meat would have been cumbersome. Using fingers allowed for quicker and more casual consumption of food. However, it's important to note that the use of fingers did not extend to all types of dishes. Buns and loaves of bread were often torn apart and eaten with the hands, while soups and stews might have been ladled onto a plate and eaten with a spoon. Finger bowls were sometimes used to clean fingers after a meal. Despite the common perception that medieval people ate with their fingers exclusively, there is evidence that forks were used in some households, particularly among the upper classes. Forks were introduced to Europe from the Middle East through trade and cultural exchange. While they were not as widespread or common as spoons and knives, some wealthier individuals might have owned and used forks for specific dishes or occasions. That concludes our list of 10 things you should know about medieval table manners. If you liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Catch you in the next one. Every bite, every mouthful of food is full of suspicion. Is there too much flavor? Is there too little? Does this dish smell strangely of something, or is that just my imagination? I cannot help but think. Think of how a second thought can ruin an entire meal. Women and their recipes are like old wives and their tales. Some say they are harmless, others claim they can heal you. There are even rumors of some harming you. Whoever heard of such things, right? Whoever has eaten his bread without thinking twice, he has got it all wrong. It is best to be wary. A monk with bitter hands once walked into a tavern. He brewed his own wine and blessed the bread that he carried. A simpleton took the bread, dipped it into the wine, and ate it. And suddenly, the bishop stopped breathing. Was it the wine, or the bread, or the hands that had laid the curse? The dead man didn't speak, so we may never know. They say that before eating, he always made the sign of the cross over the food. After all, who knows what might happen if one eats without a prayer, without asking for God's blessing? And then there are those who whisper, who knows what might happen if one eats something that does not belong to him? For instance, the baker's daughter, who ate the king's poisoned bread and was executed for it. That was the price of curiosity. How many of you have heard of trial by swallowing? A nice piece of bread, a cup of water, and if you choke, you lose. If you survive, you win. Sounds like a children's game, doesn't it? But no one dares play it, and when someone wins, they don't tell you because the rules are different for everyone. The baker puts his trust in the bread, the vintner in the cup. Each one believes that his wares will protect him. They say the Lord will not forsake his people, so each one says a prayer, makes a sign of the cross, touches holy water, or sprinkles holy ashes. Everyone swears by the saints. But who will protect you from human tongues? The bread was touched, they say. The cup lingered. When the king went in to be healed, they say the queen hoped that he would die. Now he is dead. Do you think that only the king's enemies desired his death? Those closest to him wanted him dead too. That's why they spread poison around him, in his food, in his drink, in the very air that he breathed. But sometimes even that was not enough. A single bite is sometimes all it takes. Once upon a time, there was a king who ate his cucumbers chopped fine. He liked them chopped just so. No one knew the reason behind it. Then one day, a young girl was brought before him. She was a village girl who had been accused of witchcraft. The king asked her to eat a cucumber. She looked at it, looked at the king, and then began to eat. First she ate half of it, then put it down, and after a while she ate the rest. She had eaten the cucumber exactly as the king liked it. That's why they say when you take your king's food into your mouth, you must not think about anything else. You must not look at anyone else. You must not do anything else. Your whole world is that mouthful of food. Because if you think of something else, you could cost the king his life. Those were perilous times. To eat was to risk your life. To feed the king was to hold his life in your hands. And yet there were those who dared. Who are you, after all, to question a king's appetite? Even now, we are not certain of our motives. Sometimes hunger, sometimes thirst. Sometimes only the need to show who is stronger, the eater or the eaten. But most of the time, meals are not a scheme. Meals are repetition. They are ritual. Let us now observe the meal itself. Not what, but how. Observe the ritual of the meal. This is a poem that was published 68 years ago by an Indian poet. In the beginning of the poem, we see fields that are drowned in rain, grain rotting, the sky staying dark, the earth staying empty. The speaker says that no bread was made, no hope was given. They talk about flour running out and ovens going cold. This sets the tone for the rest of the poem. This is a poem about famine. We hear about people who are starving. We hear about children who are so hungry that they stop crying, that they stop asking for food because there's nothing to give, there's less to promise. This is a very powerful image. A child who's so hungry that he stops asking for more food. What kind of hunger is this? This is the kind of hunger that can break your bones, that can fill your insides with lead, that can make you forget what it's like to feel alive. Then the speaker says that people ate roots and bark. They ate whatever was left. Then they ate what was not food, bark and weeds and dirt. It filled the space where their insides used to be. Have you ever heard of a famine before? I have only read about them. Thank God I haven't seen one, but I know that people eat dirt when they're starving. It's called pica. That's when you crave dirt, but you're not the only one. Animals do it too, especially those who live in captivity. They eat dirt because their bodies need some minerals that are in the dirt. But for humans, it's usually a sign of starvation. And then comes one of the most heartbreaking images in this poem, death in the fields. People are so hungry that they keep searching for grain, even though they know the fields are empty. They keep digging in the mud, even though their hands are already bruised and bleeding. They keep looking for food, even though they know there isn't any. And this is how they die, with their hands in the mud, with the dirt on their knees, with the hope of finding something, anything to eat. And their breath leaves them. Their eyes stay open, staring at the dark and empty sky. And this is what a famine does to you. It hollows you out from the inside. It makes you forget how to feel, how to be human. I'm glad I've never seen a famine, but I'm also glad that I've never seen what it does to a person, to a human inside. Because if we're not careful, hunger can make us animals, can make us eat dirt and bark and weeds and die in fields. Have you ever experienced this kind of hunger or seen what it does to people around you? I don't think I have. I'm glad I don't have that story to tell, but I do have stories of people who have lost their homes and who are living in shelters. And I am grateful to each and every one of you who supported us through our fundraiser. Because of you, we were able to provide food and essentials to these families, and it was beautiful to see so many of you come together and do something so wonderful. But if you missed out on this fundraiser, or if you want to do a little bit more, we've now started a relief fund. The link is in the description. Through this fund, we will continue to support these families, help them rebuild their lives, and be a part of their journey towards healing. Just a quick reminder, the link is in the description. If you liked this poem, you might also like another poem called An Elementary School Classroom in a Slum. It talks about children who are born into poverty, who've never seen sunlight, who don't know what it's like to feel the wind on their skin. If you'd like to read that poem, it's on our website. You can also listen to it on Spotify. We have an audiobook of poems on Spotify. It's called Poetry for the Soul. Do share it with your friends. It makes my day when you do that. And thank you for listening. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me today. If you're still here, I'll see you next time. They were hungry because the gods had turned their backs on them, or so they thought. In this bleak world of famine and pestilence, the church offered solace and salvation. And instead of food, it gave prayers, just prayers. Hope for mercy when mercy was gone. Stories in the dark, tales of saints and miracles to distract from the ache inside. In the shadows, people pointed fingers. They blamed witches, they blamed Jews, they blamed each other. But the rain did not stop. It fell like knives, slashing the crops to pieces, slashing their hope to pieces. There were no answers, only accusations, only the rain. Slowly, silently, the famine left scars across the land, across the people. They retreated into themselves. They hoarded what little they had. They whispered in the dark about how there had always been enough. The stores were full, the tables laden. There would have been food if only everyone hadn't taken so much. Everyone except us. We never took more than our share. We never caused this. Then finally the sun broke through the clouds. The rain stopped. The river flowed again. Birds sang in the trees. People looked up at the sky with startled eyes. The world felt new, empty, fragile. I'm here to tell you that there was a time when the earth did not want to give her children food. A time when the fields stood empty and the granaries were bare. A time when every bite was a prayer and every morsel a miracle. A time when people sold their children to eat. That is why we remember. That is why we gather around the table. That is why we bless the food before we eat. Because we know how fragile life is, how fragile happiness is, how fragile food is. Our ancestors crossed the sea. To escape war and persecution, they sailed across the waves for weeks, eating nothing but dry bread and rainwater. Once, right before their eyes, one of the sailors died of hunger. They buried him in the sea. They closed his eyes and lowered him into the deep. The captain wept. He vowed to avenge his friend. He swore they would find fertile lands, lands filled with food and wine. They would build a new life there or die trying. And when they finally saw the shore, they named it the Blessed Land. On that first night, they feasted under the stars. They ate everything they could find. Wild fruits and nuts, fish from the streams, birds from the trees. Nothing was rare. Everything was a blessing. They slept with full bellies, grateful and tired. Then the hard times came, the rains came, crops failed, cattle died, people grew thin. They looked for help, but all they got were prayers. Go to the house of prayer, they told us. Lay your burdens down. Pray. Have faith. Miracles do happen. They do happen. Every day they went to the house of prayer. Men, women, children, everyone prayed. At first, their voices rose and fell like the waves on the shore. Then their voices grew louder, more desperate, more angry. Why? What did they do to deserve this? They cried out against the heavens. They shouted until their throats were hoarse, until their prayers turned into screams. They accused each other, the rich, the poor, the old, the young. Accusations hung in the air like smoke. but the rain did not stop. Now my grandmother tells the story. She says that when all hope was gone, 2 children stayed behind in the town while everyone else went to the house of prayer. One was blind and couldn't see the suffering. The other was mute. He couldn't speak his hunger. They played together in the ruins of the town square, unaware of the misery around them. For them, the sun still shone. For them, the birds still sang. When the others returned, they asked, "What did you do to deserve this? How could you stay here while we prayed? What did you do?" And the blind child answered, "We played. We played because it was a beautiful day." And the mute child, he touched their hands, their faces, their clothes. And the townspeople understood. The rain had cleansed them. The hunger had made them small. "We played," they said. "We played because it was a beautiful day. When the famine is over and the fields are green again, then we will play too," the townspeople promised. But that day never came, not in their lifetime. They died of old age. They became blind, mute, and deaf, unaware of the misery around them. My grandmother also tells a story about an old woman who didn't pray. She didn't beg for food. She didn't wait for a miracle. Instead, she went into the forest, into the wilderness. She hunted and fished. She traded what she caught for what she needed. She bartered, bargained. She never asked for mercy. Once the famine was over, she was called a witch. They took her into the forest. They tore her clothes. They cut her skin. But she did not cry out. She did not beg for mercy. She looked at the sky and said, "This is what I have to endure for being clever. We must be like the old woman," my grandmother used to say. "We must be clever. If there's nothing to eat, then we must go and find it. If the church cannot help us, then we must help ourselves." But not everyone listened. Not everyone wanted to listen. Some people, especially the priests, were very afraid of the old woman. They locked themselves in the church and waited for God to save them. They prayed, they confessed, they blessed themselves, they begged for forgiveness, but the rain did not stop. The rivers rose, they took the church. So I have heard, so I have seen. When I was young, there was still water in the pipes, in the wells, in the rivers. But now the pipes are empty, the wells are dry, the riverbed is cracked and bare. We don't know how long it will be until the water returns. And my grandmother, she is even older now. Her stories are fading, turning into whispers, turning into dust. Whenever we sit down to eat, my mother reminds us, remember the stories, remember what we went through. She gives thanks for the food, for every bite, for every morsel. "Thank you for this gift," she says. "Thank you for sending us food and drink. Thank you for saving us from hunger and thirst." Amen. My father nods, his eyes fixed on the table. He takes a piece of bread, looks at it as if seeing it for the first time. Then he puts it in his mouth slowly, savoring its taste. "Do you remember what bread tasted like?" he asks me sometimes. Of course I do. How could I forget? The crusty outside, the soft inside, the salt, the oil, the way it breaks between your teeth. "Do you remember?" he asks. And I look at him, confused, wondering if he is really asking me or himself. We know what bread tastes like. We know what water feels like on our lips, what milk tastes like in our mouths, what meat tastes like on our tongues. But how can we explain that to those who have never known hunger, never known thirst, those who have never watched their parents turn into ghosts, their laughter echoing in empty rooms? I look at my son, playing with his wooden train. He doesn't know what hunger is. He doesn't know what thirst is. He has never experienced the sweet taste of cherries, the cold touch of ice cream, the comforting smell of stew. His world is full, overflowing with food. And I wonder, will he ever understand what it means to be hungry? Will he ever understand what it means to be grateful? Of course he will, because I will tell him stories. I will tell him about the famine and the flood, about the hunger and the thirst, about the people who prayed for rain, and the people who hunted in the forest, about the old woman who knew how to find food, and the 2 children who played in the ruins, about the bird that brought water from the river, about the river that took the church, about the scars the hunger left on our hearts and the memories the hunger left in our mouths. Now let us step back and taste what lasted, the memory of food itself. They wrote them down, recipes in ash and ink. They wrote them down in Latin. In haste, measurements vague, ingredients strange. For bread, they wrote down flour and water, salt and yeast, a pinch of something sweet. That's one way to make bread. There are others. This recipe stayed still. We bake it still. We break it still. Different hands, same ritual. With flour and water, salt and yeast, a pinch of something sweet. Recipes are fragile things. They can be lost or left unwritten. Like so much knowledge, they rely on someone taking the time to write them down, to pass on the magic, the alchemy of turning flour and water into something more, of turning something dead into something alive. For ale, they wrote down take barley, malt it, boil it, add hops and yeast, and then wait. It was bitter now, stronger too, but born of the same need, safe water. Do you remember when the water turned to wine? When I dipped my hand in, it felt like velvet. Recipes are echoes of survival. For soups, they wrote down pottage. Boil it, stir it, wait a while, add what you have. The poor made it, we still do. A broth, a porridge, something to sustain you through the cold, through the hunger. Recipes are lifelines. They connect us to those who came before, those who had to stretch every ingredient, those who had to make do with what they had. Do you remember when the stew was served cold? They didn't have a fire. And do you remember the taste of that bread, hard and sour, but life-sustaining? Recipes are more than just words on a page. They're stories without which we'd have nothing. Cinnamon, they wrote it down. Cinnamon, common now, but once rare, carried the weight of ship's cinnamon. Once it was worth more than your house, more than your life. Do you remember how the spices smelled, how they stained your fingers red and brown and gold? Once, cinnamon was worth more than your life. It arrived on ships carrying the ghosts of far-off lands. It was worth more than your life. It could cost you your life. These recipes are all that remain of their alchemy. Of course, there are other recipes, some of them better written, more precise. There are others for honey cakes and sausages, for tarts and pies. These recipes were written in haste. They were meant to be used, not admired. They're faded now, stained by the juices of centuries. Their edges are curled and singed. Some of them were rescued from a burning monastery. Others were found in a woman's spattered apron pocket, her bones beneath them. It's strange how recipes can conjure an entire world. They carry within them the weight of lives lived and lost, of families gathered and scattered, of winters endured and springs that arrived. Despite the vague measurements and the odd ingredients, these recipes survived. They were followed. They sustained. I see them still, the shelves lined with ash and ink, with recipes for life. Do you remember when the flour ran out and we had to use sawdust? Do you remember the hollow taste of that bread? What about the beer we brewed from sawdust? It kept for years, the recipe says. Better to drink than water, it says, though it tastes like ash in your mouth. You can still smell the wood on your fingers. How long has it been since we used sawdust? There are other recipes I won't read, not today. Some of them speak of feasts and banquets, of hares and venison, of peacock and pheasant. I won't read them now. Let the dead have their feasts. Let the hunters hunt. We've survived this long without them. And there are recipes for preserving life, for making medicines, salves and tinctures. There is a cure for everything, they wrote, if you know where to find it. Even death has its cure if you know where to find it. Some recipes come with warnings, some with incantations, some with prayers. All of them are meant to help. All of them are echoes of a time when people relied on more than machines, more than pills, when they relied on themselves, on each other, on the earth. The recipes tell a story. They're a lifeline. They're a history, a survival guide, a magic. They're everything we've needed them to be. Because recipes are more than just recipes. They're a connection to the past, to each other, to the world around us. They're a way of understanding our place in the universe. Because recipes, they're all that remains of their alchemy. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel. We know you've been waiting for this moment for an entire year, and we can hear you. We can hear you saying, "Oh, not again, not this thing." But we have to do it. You know, people say we're too old for this. People say, stop acting like children, but this is what we love doing. So let's begin. We'll start with one simple rule that must be followed by all of our viewers today. Are you ready? Don't be nasty. Yes, we know it's hard for some of you. Well, if you think it's hard, just wait until April. Okay, we want you to behave like the Easter Bunny. That doesn't mean hopping around, leaving baskets of goodies for everyone, or maybe hopping around and giving everyone baskets of goodies. No, it means spreading cheer, spread joy, and remember, no nastiness. Now let's go back in time, let's go back to March. When March began, we were all looking forward to spring. No more winter blues, right? Wrong. A pandemic followed us from February to March, and then to April, and then to May, and then to June. Oh, and July, August, September, October, November, and December. But we never lost hope. And now it's March again, and we're looking forward to spring. So here's a question for you. What did we learn over the past 12 months? How about a little respect for Mother Nature? She needs her space too. We should give her some time. She's done a lot for us, and it's only fair to show her we're grateful. Plus, we all need to cool down a bit. If we don't, we might end up like this poor guy. Hands washed, mouths closed, forks now, but still behave. Did you learn that one? Good. Now let's move on to the next rule. Let's talk about fast days. We don't mean those crazy fast days where you drink nothing but water for 2 weeks and lose 10 kilos. No. We mean a simpler fast. Do you remember when your mom told you no snacks until dinner, or when you said no to that third slice of pizza? Those are fast days. Now make them a little harder. Give up something you love during one meal. Give up pasta. No, not just for one day, but for one whole meal. Give up rice for an entire day. Give up potatoes. No fried potatoes, baked potatoes, mashed potatoes. Nothing, just for one day. We're sure you can do it. And after that, treat yourself to the best meal ever. But before you eat it, take a moment to remember those who are less fortunate than you. There are many people who can't afford 3 meals a day, let alone an entire feast. So remember them, and we're sure you'll behave. Lent still lingers. Belief baked into habit. Have you heard that song? Can you sing it for us? If you can't, it's time to practice. You'll find the lyrics below. Now let's move on to the next rule. The smell of roast. It fills streets now, not just halls. And that's right. We're talking about food. Lots of food, especially meat. We know you love it, and so do we. After a long, cold winter, there's nothing better than a good old roast. But do you remember why people used to roast meat? Because they wanted to celebrate something. A wedding, a christening, a king visiting town, anything. And even though times have changed and kings are rarely seen, we still love to roast. And that means only one thing: behave. If you're going to enjoy a delicious piece of meat, you must remember it's not just you who deserves a celebration. The animal gave its life so you could eat, so you must thank it. Thank you for your gift. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your love. And remember, eating meat isn't a sin, but wasting it is. Now it's time for the last rule. And remember, this rule is valid every day of the year, not just today. Remember those in need. Remember those who are hungry and cold. And how can you help them? You can open your window and let the sunshine in. You can smile at people. You can share. Share your toys. Share your food. Share your clothes. Share your umbrella. Share your knowledge. Share your happiness. Oh, and remember, we're getting old. We can't run around the house like kids anymore. No eggs, no flour, no water balloons. But we can still play. We can still jump and dance and sing. We can still laugh and be happy. We can still tell jokes, and we can still be kind. Happy April Fool's Day. I woke up this morning thinking about two wolves who gathered berries. They weren't friends, they were rivals. And yet they shared their bounty at a place where the river widened into a pool in the forest, a place called the idea of the meal. Every night before I go to sleep, I think about what I want to talk about when I wake up. I don't always get it. Sometimes the next day I wake up and there's nothing there. But this idea of the meal stayed with me. When we eat together, we are connected. When we break bread, we share stories. Food brings people together. It comforts us. It sustains us. It gives us energy. But sometimes the food that brings us together also carries our fears, our faith, our hopes, our heartaches. There are certain foods that remind me of holidays when I was growing up, like my grandmother's cornflake sweet bread, which she would make every Christmas morning while the rest of us were opening presents. And my mother's friend Sally's potato salad, with all the mustard and onions, which she would bring to every potluck we ever had. And then there's punchki, these delicious little fried pastries filled with rose hip and plum, and sometimes even cheese. They're a treat from my childhood that my mom still makes. Every year when she pulls out the rolling pin, it means we're gonna have punchki for breakfast. Food tells the stories of those who came before us. For generations, humans have come together around food. We gather food and we share it. We eat together, we tell stories, we build community, we create meaning. That's what the idea of the meal means to me. It's more than just sustenance. It's connection, it's tradition, it's memory. It's like the Jewish custom of eating matzah ball soup on a Friday night, or how my grandmother would set an extra place at our table for my grandfather even after he died. Or how we would gather every Sunday for a big family dinner, even though most of the time it was just my brother and I fighting over the last chicken wing while our parents argued in the other room. You know, we eat in comfort. We eat surrounded by family and friends. But what if we could also acknowledge the echoes that linger around the table? What if we let those echoes remind us that we are connected to something bigger than ourselves? Sometimes at night, when I can't sleep, I think about all the people who ate at my table, all the people who sat here before me, all the people who will sit here after me. There's so much wisdom in this idea. It reminds me of the indigenous cultures in North America who have this tradition called the Three Sisters, where they plant corn, beans, and squash together in one field. They take care of each other. They grow together. The idea of the meal is similar to that. We are all connected. The food that we eat, the table that we sit at, the stories that we tell, it all connects us to something bigger than ourselves. When we eat, let's not only enjoy the taste and the warmth and the comfort, but also remember the meaning behind the food. Remember the people who grew it, the people who made it, the people who shared it, and the people who will eat it after us. In the quiet moments around the table, let's listen to the stories that the food is telling us. Let's listen to the echoes of the past. Let's be grateful for the gift of food and the gift of community. Thank you for sitting with me today. Thank you for sharing this meal with me. Thank you for listening to the echoes of the past. I hope you leave feeling nourished and connected. Sleep now. Sleep full.